Welcome, everyone. This is your friend here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Tony finds out Peter is his biological son? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Chapter Rhodey meets Peter. Rhodey makes his way through the compound, not paying too much attention to where he's going, just politely nodding a hello to people who recognize him as he walks by. It's been a few weeks since he's last seen Tony, and that's usually not a good sign. A quiet Tony was a Tony that was either drowning his anxiety in drink or was running on nearly 50 hours of no sleep and close to blowing himself up because of the sleep exhaustion. Although, the first one was not as likely nowadays, as it seems like his friend has mostly given up drinking, which was a big shock to him when Tony had told him that he was cutting back on the alcohol. Proud but shocked. From the brief conversations he's had with Pepper, apparently Tony wasn't quiet because he's working himself to death, or at least not more than usual. No, he's been quiet because he's been preoccupied by an intern, a personal intern. Which is odd because in all the years he's known his friend, Tony has always said that he'd never have an intern because they'd never keep up with him. However, according to Pepper, this intern and Tony are quite close, and Tony's not a fan of getting close to people. Pepper didn't tell him much when he asked about the intern that had to be smart enough for Tony to work with. She mostly just said that he should see the intern and how Tony is with him, with his own eyes because he might not believe it otherwise. Which just makes him more intrigued by this mysterious intern. He guesses that the intern is a bit on the young side, maybe late teens, because during the conversations with Pepper, the only other thing she would say about the intern was how adorable he is. Which again make him all the more intrigued. So, he figured it was time to meet this intern, especially since Tony is getting close to him. His friend has had enough people betray him, so even if the intern has Pepper's seal of approval, Rhodey needs to check this guy out for himself. Good evening, Colonel Rhodes. Friday's voice rang out as Rhodey enters the elevator. Hey, typed Tony in his lab. The question was rhetorical. When wasn't Tony in his lab? Yes, shall I take you to him? Please. Rhodey leans against the wall of the elevator to take some of the weight off his leg braces. Most of the time they are fine, but if he walks around in them for a while, they start to get a little uncomfortable. Though, he much prefers having these leg braces to having a wheelchair. The elevator doors open and Rhodey makes his way into Tony's personal lab. Hey, Tony Stank, Rhodey starts speaking as soon as he opens the door. What's this I've been hearing Abu Dash? Rhodey freezes mid-step and mid-sentence when he sees Tony, or more accurately when he sees a kid sitting next to his friend. A kid that, when he and Tony look up at him entering the lab, looks freakishly like Tony did when he first met him back at MIT. It may have been 30 years, give or take, since he met his best friend, but he'd never forget the first time that he met the skinny little kid that had a busted lip because he had mouthed off to one of the much older students. He'd never forget that little face. The face that he was suddenly seeing all over again, sat next to his best friend. He has the same curls that Tony did when he was 15, before he started cutting his hair shorter to get rid of them in an attempt to stop looking as young. It was hard enough being 15 and in college, he didn't want to look as young as he was too. The kid also has the same freaking eyes as Tony. Big and brown, like Bambi. Even their noses look almost the same. He was seriously looking at 15-year-old Tony all over again. When the hell did this happen, and why the hell didn't Tony call him and tell him that he found out that he has a kid? Honey Bear, Tony grins, what are you doing here? Figured I'd drop in. Rhodey slowly walks over towards Tony and the kid, still trying to process just what the hell is going on. Rhodey watches the kid's eyes go wide as he looks at him. Why are Colonel Rhodes? War Machine. It's amazing to meet you, sir. You're awesome. Tony rolls his eyes, but the grin stays firmly on his face. You can just call him Rhodey, Pete, and he's not as awesome as me. Peter snorts a laugh. Keep telling yourself that. You little sheet. You've clearly gotten way too comfortable with me, Tony says with no heat in his voice, only fondness, and Rhodey watches completely fascinated by the scene. What happened to the starstruck Peter who used to stutter when he saw me? The starstruck Peter disappeared after you got attacked by Dummy and the fire extinguisher, for the third time in the same day. That stupid bot. I really am going to donate him one of these days, Tony grumbles and lets out whiny beep from the corner of the room. Yes, I am, because you're useless. Tony shakes his head as he turns back to Rhodey. Where were we? Rhodey points to Peter. Right, Honey Bear, this is Peter. It's nice to meet you, Peter. Rhodey smiles the boy. It's nice to meet you too, and I already said that, when you first came in. Peter's cheeks turn red in embarrassment as Tony smirks. He finds joy in the kid's embarrassment, and lucky for him the kid is easy to embarrass. Before anyone can say anything else, Peter's phone rings and he fumbles to answer it. Aunt May. Oops, I guess we lost track of time. Peter looks up at Tony, who looks at his watch and swears under his breath when he sees it past 7 and Peter was supposed to be back at his aunt's at 7 because it's a school night. He fishes out his phone and sends a quick text to Happy. Happy will take you back, he'll be waiting outside. Peter nods and returns his attention to his phone. I'm leaving now, Aunt May. Be back soon. He moves to pick up his school bag. And don't worry, my homework, it's all done. See you soon. Peter puts his phone away and heads towards the elevator. By Mr. Stark, Colonel Rhodes. See you on Saturday. See you, kid. We'll finish these then. Tony motions to the web shooters that they had been working on, and then watches the boy leave with a soft smile on his face. Once the elevator closes, Rhodey turns to Tony. He calls you Mr. Stark? Trust me. I've tried to get the kid to stop, but he refuses to call me anything but Mr. Stark. Tony shakes his head, but the smile still on his face shows that he finds it more amusing than annoying. I'm pretty sure he's doing it on purpose, because he's a little sheet. Pepper doesn't believe me because she hasn't seen the snarky, little sheet Peter yet. She's only seen the innocent, butter wouldn't melt Peter. Rhodey just blinks at Tony, still trying to get his head around what just happened and that he wasn't told about Peter. He knows Tony can get carried away with things and then suddenly days have gone by without the man realizing it, but forgetting to tell his best friend that he found out he has a kid? What? Tony asks after a few moments of Rhodey just staring at him. You want to tell me why I wasn't told I had a nephew? Your sister had another kid? Tony's eyebrows frown in confusion. What? No. Then what are you talking about? What am I talking about? Rhodey stares at Tony incredulously. Peter. What about Peter? Are you purposely avoiding right now? Avoiding what? Why didn't you tell me you found out you had a kid? Whoa. Tony's eyes go wide as he finally realizes what Rhodey was talking about. I don't have it. Peter, he isn't mine. He's just my intern. He's the intern Pepper was talking about? Yek, Tony says like it should have been obvious. He's like 14. 15 and he's a genius. He may even become smarter than me one day. He definitely has the potential to make the world a better place with his brain. Rhodey is finding it hard to believe that Peter still isn't Tony's kid because of how proud the man sounds as he talks about how smart the kid is. I mean, he made and perfected his web formula by himself in his chemistry class. Web formula? Rhodey frowns. Sheet, Tony winces. He forgot that he never actually told Rhodey who was under the spider mask. After what happened at the airport and the Siberia, he was more focused on just helping his friend get some legs. Plus, for the first couple of months he wasn't really too involved with Peter, only listening to the messages the kid left on Happy's phone. Tony, Rhodey says slowly. You remember that kid in Germany? Spider-Man? No, Rhodey shakes his head, staring hard at the man. Do not tell me you brought a kid to a fight, Tony. A kid? Tony sighs, running a hand over his face. Trust me, I regret doing that. At the time I wasn't thinking, I just wanted Rogers to stop trying to tear us apart and I figured if it looked like he was outnumbered he would just let us take him in and we could work things out. And I figured that if a fight did happen, it wouldn't be a rough fight because we were supposed to be friends. Then the fight started getting rougher, and the kid got hit and went flying, so I sent him back to the hotel with Happy. Rhodey closes his eyes and sighs. It's still not okay that you brought a kid into something he wasn't a part of. I know, and like I said, I regret it. The lab is quiet for a moment, and Rhodey can see just how guilty Tony is over bringing the kid to Germany. It's written plain as day in his eyes. So, he'll drop it for now as his friend is clearly beating himself up enough for the both of them and he already has a bad habit of self-deprecating, so there's no point in making him feel even worse. You said he made his web formula himself? So, it's not coming from him? Rhodey asks, genuinely curious, did he just decide one day to become a superhero and theme it after spiders? Tony chuckles, no, actually he got bit by a radioactive spider and, while shooting webs from his body isn't one of them, it gave him powers. Rhodey looks at Tony for a moment and blinks, wait, you're serious? As a heart attack, if Tony didn't know Peter, he would have called bullcrap on the kid's story. However, he does know Peter. He was on a field trip to Oscorp's. Tony rolls his nose up at Osborn's company, and one of their little experiments escaped and decided to bite Pete. Not really that surprising that Osborn has crappy health and safety in his labs. He said that he was sick for about 3 or 4 days before waking up and feeling better than ever. And you said he got powers from the spider. Yeah, the kid can stick to walls like actual spiders. He likes to sit on the ceiling to do his homework, which is both amazing and terrifying to watch. Mostly terrifying when it's 2 in the morning and you just wanted to grab a glass of water from the kitchen and you look up to see the kid is just chilling on the ceiling reading a book. Because he couldn't sleep, Tony shakes his head at the memory. He's also faster and more agile than normal people, and he's as strong as Rogers is. Maybe more. We haven't actually gotten around to testing that yet. Which we really should. That little kid is as strong as Rogers? Demon Rhodey can't lie, he's pretty impressed. He also has this sixth sense kind of thing. Him and his friend have named it his Spidey sense, but it's basically like his body has an early warning system that alerts him to danger, which with the amount of trouble he seems to get into it's a DMN good thing he has it. He's always seems to find trouble? Rhodey smirks. Now why does that sound familiar? Tony rolls his eyes. Shut up, platypus. How did you find this kid anyway? Tony groans. He was swinging around Queens, in a freaking onesie, fighting crime. A onesie? Tony groans again, remembering how the stupidly unprotected Peter's first suit was. Even before everything that happened with the Accords, I was looking into this spider guy that had been popping up. I figured I'd track him down and see if he wanted to be an Avenger, but when I did track him down, I found out that Spider-Man was more like Spider-Boy. I decided to leave it a few years before talking to him about the Avengers, but I did start making him a suit because the one he was using was just ridiculous. He'll admit, it wasn't too bad for a fursuit, but still, it's a freaking onesie. I thought that if the kid was going to go after bike thieves and whatnot then he should at least be as safe as a vigilante can be, so dash. So, you made him a suit with, I'm guessing, a whole bunch of safety features. Yep, I was going to give it to him and just let him continue on help the little people, but then the Accords happened and Rogers. And now, after Germany? I mean, you've made him your intern. For the first couple of months I stayed away and had Happy watch him dash. Bet Happy loved that. Rhodey chuckles. Peter is like an overexcited puppy. He filled Happy's phone with texts and voicemails in the 2 months he was watching him. Anyway, me staying away didn't really work out so well. Admittedly, he saved the day in the end, but still it got a little messy and I think I started talking like my dad at one point. Anyway, after his aunt found out about his little Spidey secret, and after she understandably yelled at me, we came to an arrangement. Every Wednesday after school Peter comes here to work in the lab for his internship, and every other weekend he also comes here to train, so he's better prepared and safer when he's out fighting crime. That's good and rather responsible. He understands what Pepper meant when she said he had to see it for himself. You said his aunt, what about his parents? Died when he was about 5 or 6, and then his uncle died last year too. His aunt is all he has left. Poor kid. Tony stands up and stretches out a little, working out the knots that had formed as he and Peter had worked. So, you just decided to drop in? Tony raises an eyebrow. I hadn't seen you in a few weeks, so I was getting worried about you. I had heard from Pepper that you had an intern, and I figured I should meet this guy, only for him to be Peter. Ah, honey bear, Tony coos, it's sweet to know you care. Rhodey just rolls his eyes, but a smile finds its way onto his face. Tony sits back down on his stool, picking up the web shooters and looking them over. He wasn't going to finish them because they are Peter's and the boy liked working on his stuff, but he just wanted to make sure that what they had done so far looked good. Why did you automatically assume that just because I hang out with a kid, in a non-creepy way, that he has to be my kid's? Tony asks, confused as to why people seem to think that. When Vision had met Peter, The android thought the same thing too. You're kidding, right? Rhodey huffs as he takes a seat. He's basically you. Just because he's smart dash. I thought he was your kid before I found out he was smart. Tony looks up at Rhodey and frowns. Then what did you mean when you said he's basically me? How have you not noticed? I met you when you were the same age as Peter is now, and looking at him is like I'm looking at 15-year-old you all over again. Has the same curls that you did before you copped them off, you got the same nose, and my God, you have the same freaking eyes. Exactly the same. Peter looks almost like you did at his age, Rhodey points out. Now add on the fact that he's a genius and has a thing for finding trouble. Tony feels his heart pounding against his ribcage. He doesn't look like me. Rhodey snorts. Trust me, I'll never forget what you looked like when I first met you. Peter looks just like you did. He really looks like he could have been your kid. Tony's eyes widen and his brain is thinking too fast to form proper thoughts. Until one sentence sticks out. He kinda looks like you. Pepper had said that first time she had met Peter. And then another one. The kid's self-preservation skill are about as good as yours. Happy had said that after Peter had stopped the vulture. He reminds me of you. That was Pepper again. She had said that after Peter had stayed over longer than normal a few Wednesdays ago and had dinner with them. You both have rather similar facial features. That's what Vision had said after he met him. He really looks like he could have been your kid. He couldn't have a kid, he'd ruin a kid. Break them. No. There was no way Tony could have a kid, especially one like Peter. The kid is way too good and pure to have come from is impossible. Plus, the chances that the random kid that he found from YouTube turning out to be his son? That sort of thing would be way too much of a coincidence, and it just doesn't happen. Nope. Anyway, loads of people have curly hair and brown eyes. The most common eye color in the world is brown. It doesn't mean anything. And the kid's parents had been scientists, so of course Peter was going to be smart. Okay, sure, Peter is the right age to line up with his Playboy days. But even when he was drunk, he was still smart enough to use protection. He always uses protection. Although condoms are only 98% effective. Well, it's not possible. It was all just a coincidence. It had to be, right? New York. Tony, you need to breath. He can barely make out Rhodey's voice, which is strange because the man is sitting right next to him. Tones, look at me, okay? Try and focus on me. Try and match my breathing. His chest is feeling painfully tight. Come on, Tony, copying my breathing. He feels Rhodey squeezing his shoulder. Right? Yeah, breathing is something he needs to do. Take a deep breath in and try and focus on me. He finally manages to take a shuddery breath in. That's good, real good. Just copy me, Rhodey encourages him, and 5 minutes later Tony's panic attack has mostly gone. Sorry, Tony mutters, exhaustion starting to hit him. You have nothing to apologize for, Rhodey pats Tony's shoulder. I started remembering things that Pepper had said, and Happy and Vision, different things about how Peter is. Like you, Rhodey says gently. Tony nods. Tony, I could be wrong. Hell, I probably am wrong. Loads of people look like each other and have no relation to Dash. He was born during my Playboy party days, so it's not like it isn't impossible. Tony ball his hands into fists, squeezing so hard his knuckles start to turn white. What if? It can't be possible for the random kid I'm mentoring to turn out to be, but what if he? Tony Dash. I think I'm going to be sick, and Tony does look an odd shade. Dummy wheels over, waving a trash can around in his claw, almost knocking Tony in the head with it, in his hurry. Thank you, Dummy. Rhodey grabs the trash can before the bot does actually hit either of them with it. Look, there's no point in getting freaked out over something that you don't even know is actually real, Rhodey says, trying to keep his friend calm. You're right. I need to find out if it is real and then I can freak out. No, that's not quite what I dash. FRI, run Peter's blood against mine. I want to know if we're a match, paternally. Right away, boss. It was lucky that he already had Peter's blood on record. He had one of the medical staff take Peter's blood a few weeks back, so that he and Peter could study it and see what changes the bite had made. He may not have a degree in genetics, but he knew enough and was fascinated to see what the spider had done. Tony, just wait for a second. Rhodey places both of his hands on Tony's shoulders, trying to keep him grounded. Why? because you need to just take a moment. I don't need a moment, Tony snaps. I need to find out if Peter's. Rhodey watches his friend try and get his breathing under control again. If he knew opening his big mouth would lead to this, he would have stayed quiet. Then again, if the boy really is Tony's, then the man has a right to know. God, he wasn't expecting anything like this to happen when he woke up this morning. All he thought he was going to do today was talk to Tony's new intern. Now, instead, he's about to find out if he has a nephew or not. Tony's about to find out if he has a son or not. Tones, you said Pepper had mentioned that Peter was like you, Rhodey says in a soft voice, hoping to keep Tony calm. Why didn't you think then that Peter could have been your kid? When Pepper said it, it was like an off-handed comment that neither of us thought much about. Tony runs a hand over his face, and Pep didn't know me when I was 15, you did, and you're saying that he looks exactly like me. And like I said, a lot of people in the world look like each other, so Peter looking like you could mean nothing. Or it could mean everything. Yeah, it could, Rhodey agrees. The problem is, will Tony be able to handle it if Peter is his kid? Personally, Rhodey knows Tony would make a good father. He's always had protective and caring instincts, even if they are usually buried deep for only a few to see. Just from the few minutes that he saw Tony and Peter interact, it was clear as day that Tony already cares for the kid and tires to protect him with the new suit and the training. However, he knows his friend will think that he'd be the worst father in the world. All because of Howard, the son of a beach, still messing with Tony's head from 6 feet under. Boss, I have the paternity results. His voice makes Tony freeze. This is it. Holy shit. He definitely might be sick. Rhodey squeezes Tony's shoulder, letting his friend know he's right here for him, as Tony lets out a shaky breath. And? It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. Chapter Tony freaks out. Tony suddenly felt hot. Very hot and clammy. And his throat feels really tight. It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. Oh God. Everything feels kinda fuzzy and hazy. He feels a little or a lot dizzy. It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. His chest feels like it's being stabbed. The pain getting worse when he attempts to take a deep breath. It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. How can he be Peter's father? How could he have possibly produced something so good and pure and kind? How can the goofy, nerdy, and diminutive, adorable boy have come from him? He doesn't deserve Peter. He doesn't. He's a mess. Always has been, and while he's been getting his act together, he's still always going to be a mess. A mess that Peter doesn't need. All he'll do is end up breaking Peter, like his father broke him. Look at him, look at his life. Drinking and drags. Out at all times and only ending up in a bed when it was to have sex with another nameless woman. And one of those nameless women was Peter's mother. Except she wasn't nameless. Mary Parker. Of course, the name doesn't ring any bells. Why would it? He would have been drunk and or high when they would have created Peter. He only knows her name now because he found it when he first found out the identity of Spider-Man. It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. There's no way he can blame Mary for not telling him that she was P-Arginin-T. Not in the slightest. Back then, there is no chance that he'd have been a good father. Not that he'd be a good one now. But he'd have been an even worse one 15 years ago. She made a smart decision in not telling him. It meant Peter got to grow up and have a good life. Away from the cameras and paparazzi. Away from the pressure of being a Stark. Away from a crappy father. It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. For as long as he could remember, he decided that he wouldn't have children. It wasn't that he necessarily didn't want to have children. It was more that fact that he couldn't bring a child into the life that he had. Cameras always in his face, seeming to capture him at his worst more often than his best. Simply because the worse he looks, the better the story. The press are assholes. A father that couldn't even take the time to tell him he was proud of him when he got into MIT at 15, or when he graduated just 2 years later. Never having any privacy. Never having his father even telling him that he liked him. Never being able to be himself. He couldn't do that to a child. It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. He'd be like his father, like Howard. It's inevitable. If he were to have a kid, he'd end up like Howard, and no kid should have to have a father like that. So he wouldn't have children. It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. But he does have a child. A son. A son that he's going to destroy, just like Howard did. It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. He's really hot. Did FRI turn up the temperature? Is that why he's dizzy? Because he's hot? He feels like he's going to throw up too. It's like his stomach is churning. And his lungs are burning. Why are his lungs burning? Actually, when was the last time he took a breath? It's a match, boss. Peter is your son. Peter's his son, and he's Peter's father. Huh. The floor's suddenly looking really close to his face. Rhodey watches Tony carefully as FROI reveals the results. For a moment it's like Tony had turned into a statue. He's completely still. Then, barely 3 seconds go by, and Tony's breaths are suddenly coming out short and sharp. Tony. Tones, it's okay. Take a deep breath. Tony. Rhodey attempts talking to Tony, but it's clear that his friend can't hear him. He takes Tony's face in his hands, making the man look at him to try and get him to focus, but it was like he was just looking through him. Then he just stops breathing altogether and begins to sway. Rhodey tries to steady Tony as he wobbles in his seat. However, the man slips off his stool and crumbles to the ground anyway. The stool banging to the ground next to him, the sound echoing around the quiet lab. It takes Rhodey a moment to maneuver his way to the floor because of his leg braces, and during that moment Tony's hand started clutching his chest. Tony, come on. You really need to breathe. Rhodey grips Tony's shoulders as the man begins to gasp for air. Seriously, Tony, you need to snap out of this and breathe. Tony continues to choke on air as he attempts and fails to breathe. Sorry about this, Rhodey mutters as he grabs Tony's arm and pinches it as hard as he can. He aware this isn't the best thing to do, but he needs Tony to focus on something else to snap out of his panic attack, or otherwise he's going to pass out. His friend has heart problems and he's already had one panic attack today. Tony yanks his arm away in surprise and pain, spluttering as his lungs start to fill with air once more. That's it. Rhodey keeps a firm grip on Tony's shoulder. Take a deep breath, like me. For the next 10 minutes the only sounds in the lab are dummy and you beeping and whirling in the corner, and the heavy breathing from Tony and Rhodey as they start getting the man's breathing back to normal. Tony's eyes flutter shut as he leans back against the table legs. What am I going to do? His voice is quiet and vulnerable. More vulnerable than he ever wants to be. Talk to me. Tell me what's going on inside that head of yours, Rhodey says softly, although he's pretty sure he knows the general idea of what Tony's thinking. I can't be a father. Why not? Tony huffs and shakes his head. Why not? Come on, look at me. I'm a mess. I'll just screw the kid up. Okay, first, the kid is 15, so you're not going to screw him up because he's already mostly grown. Second, yeah, you used to be a mess, but you've gotten a hell of a lot better, and I'm pretty sure it's because of Peter that you're doing better. That's something good parents do. Change and get themselves better for their child. No, I'm not. I'll be just like Howard. Tones, the fact that you are worried about turning out like Howard just proves that you won't be like him. That you'll be better than him, you already are. I brought Peter to Germany, Rhodey. I was selfish and I put him in danger. I gave him a suit and let him just continue his crime fighting, and oh God, the vulture. He almost drowned, and then the ferry, I took his suit. The suit that was meant to keep him safe, I just took it, and then he had a building fall on him. The building. And he was on the plane when it crashed. All in the same night while wearing his unprotected onesie because I took his suit. Tony's breaths start coming out short once more. He almost died like 3 times in a week. Rhodey's eyes widen in shock. Wow, he really is Tony's kid. He's going to come back to the drowning and the building falling on the kid and the plane crash in a bit. He's got to stop Tony from freaking out first. Tony, you're not going to be perfect. No parent is. You have to learn from your mistakes, and you did. You gave him the suit back and you're training him. You're in contact with his aunt, right? So, you're watching out for him, keeping him as safe as you can. Not safe enough. Tony Dash. I'm not like Howard, I'm worse. Stop, Rhodey says firmly. You're not Howard, Tony, or worse than him. You are so much better than him for one simple reason: you care about Peter. Yeah, well, I'd like to see you spend more than 5 minutes with him and try not to care about him. The little brat is like a freaking puppy, Tony mutters, and Rhodey smirks. already wrapped around his little finger. Again, I'd like to see you resist his Bambi eyes. Teenagers are meant to be gross and hormonal, not adorable. It's hard to say no to him. Well, as his uncle, I'm not supposed to say no to him. I'm meant to spoil him. Rhodey shrugs with a smirk. Tony huffs, a small smile flickering on his mouth before he rubs his hands over his face and groans. What am I going to do? Tones dash. I'll ruin him. You don't think I will, but I'm not meant to be a father dash. Rhodey snorts in disbelief. You're kidding, right? Tony, you've basically been like a father for years, ever since you first built Dumb. You treat those bots like they are your kids. I mean, you even send them to the naughty corner when they misbehave. Yeah, because threatening to send them as scraps to colleges is something a good father does, Tony says sarcastically. All the bots know you don't mean it when you say it because they know you love them. So yes, that's something a good father does, let his kids know no matter what he loves them. Rhodey dash. And you looked after them team, bringing up the Avengers is a sore spot, but he needs Tony to get it into his thick head. You gave them a home. Completely free. You were constantly upgrading all their suits and weapons to make sure they were as safe as possible when fighting. And now, with Peter, you're being responsible with him. You stopped drinking, which I'm pretty sure was because of him, and you watch over him. Rhodey makes sure that Tony is looking at him. You are a good father. Tony sniffles and quickly wipes at his eyes. Starks don't cry, that's what his father would say. But Peter's a Stark, and Tony spent time, after the boys had a nightmare, letting him cry on his shoulder and telling him that it's okay to let it out. Telling him that crying doesn't mean you're weak. Right now that you're calm dash. I was calm before. Tony mumbles. Let's talk about this. Peter's your son. Tony takes in a sharp breath, apparently. If we ignore the fact that you think you'd make a CRP father, which again is bullshit, what do you think about him being your kid? It can't be too bad, can it? You already like him. Peter's the best of us. I couldn't even dream of having a better child than him. He's perfect, well, almost perfect. I could do without his ability to find trouble. Yeah, well, he clearly takes after you. Rhodey smirks. Karma is sweet. Tony groans. I don't want him to take after me. I was awful. Drinking, drags, parties, and meaningless SC. He shakes his head. I don't want Peter to be like me. I want him to be better. And he's going to be, because he'll have you helping him avoid the mistakes you made. Rhodey points out. Don't you think that, if Peter's as good as you say he is, you should give being his dad a try? I think Peter deserves the chance to have you be his dad. You should try it for him and for yourself. The lab is silent for a few minutes, aside from the bots and their beeping, as Tony continues to try and get his head around the idea that he has a child. And not just any child, but Peter. The kid that somehow managed to worm his way into his heart without him even realizing he'd done it until it was already too late and he was wrapped around his little finger. Peter is truly an amazing boy, and the fact that he's Tony's, it's hard to believe. The boy is unbelievably kind and caring, and has an amazing amount of faith in people. He's incredibly smart and not at all arrogant about it. He's very loyal and always sees the good in people. Wow, Peter really is like a human version of a dog. He's also so trusting, which does worry him a lot, because he can totally see Peter being one of those kids that gets in the creepy white van because he was told there was candy. Yeah, Peter could do with being a little more cautious. There's also the fact that Peter got his powers when he was 14, and instead of using them to become cooler in school, which any other high schooler would have done, he became Spider-Man. He helps out the little people not to be famous, but just because he felt like it was his responsibility now that he has powers. How could this kid be his kid? No matter what Rhodey says, he'll never deserve Peter. Though, he's not sure that anyone deserves Peter. But he could try for Peter to be a dad if that's what Peter wants. Hell, he'd move the moon if Peter wanted him to. He'll just have to take things slow and make sure he doesn't turn into his father. Rhodey watches Tony as the man thinks everything through. He knows it's going to take a lot more than a few words of praise before Tony finally, if ever, believes he's a good dad, but if they can just get past the initial panic, then he thinks that things could go well. And it's not like Tony will be alone in this. He'll have him and Pepper, and Happy too, helping him out. They'll be there to enjoy the good days, and be there to remind Tony that he's not a bad dad on the not-so-good days. It's what families do. Tony slowly lets out a sigh and looks at Rhodey. I have a son. You have a son, Rhodey nods and smiles at the man who is basically his brother. Now, what was that about my nephew almost drowning, having a building fall on him and being in a plane crash? Tony's leg bounces nervously as he sits on the couch waiting for Pepper to get home. Rhodey had left about an hour ago, after he reassured him for the 7th time that he'd be okay by himself until Pepper got home. He needed a little time to himself before his appealing fiancée got back to try and figure out what he was going to say to her. He's put her through so much already that it was a miracle to him that she actually agreed to marry him. And now he has to tell her that Peter's his son. He knows that Pepper likes Peter. She finds him adorable. But he was still a little worried that finding out that he had a kid, whether it was Peter or not, would upset her. Tony shoots up from the couch as the elevator opens and high heels click against the floor. Sorry, I'm late, honey. One meeting ran late, which led to a domino effect with the other meetings. You know what it's like. Pepper smiles sweetly at Tony as she walks into the room, but frowns slightly at how much Tony looks like a frightened animal. Are you okay? Rhodey said he'd be stopping by today. Was everything all right? Is Peter okay? No, everything is fine. Well, I guess it's fine, then. I mean, Peter's fine, he's at home with May, and yeah, Rhodey stopped by. Tony rambles nervously, everything he planned to say just flying out the window, along with his nerves. You're starting to worry me. What's wrong? Pepper comes to a stop just a few steps away from Tony. I have a son, Tony blurts out before he realizes it. That's not quite how he wanted it to come out. Pepper blinks at him for a moment as she unconsciously sits on the couch, wrapping her head around what he just said. Right, okay. She always wondered whether Tony would have any children out in the world as a result from his wilder days. And while it should be a little expected because of his wild days, it's still a shock. She knows she can't be mad at him for getting someone pregnant before they were even a couple, but it does hurt a little. Even though being a father does suit Tony. He's become much more responsible since Peter's come into his life. Tony quickly realizes what he said could sound really bad. I didn't cheat on you. I could never dash. I know. This was years ago, before we were together dash. Honey, I know you wouldn't. I love you so much, Pep. I could never in a million years be with anyone other than you. Tony kneels on the floor in front of her. You have to believe me, dash. Tony. Pepper raises her voice slightly to get Tony to shut up. I trust you. I know you wouldn't cheat on me. I already figured that this must have been from years ago. Tony sags in relief, his head resting on Pepper's lap as her hands run through his hair. They stay like this for a few minutes before Pepper gets back to business. What's his name? And why are you only finding out now? Did something happen to his mother? Do I need to talk to the lawyers? It's Peter. Huh. That might get a little confusing having two Peters, but dash. No. There's only one Peter. Tony lifts his head from Pepper's lap, and she gives him a confused look. It's the same Peter. Peter, as in Peter Parker? Pepper asks and Tony nods, as in your intern, who is also Spider-Man. That Peter? He's your son? Yeah, I had a hard time believing it too. Still am. Tony mutters the last bit. Pepper bites her lip to try and stop herself from laughing, but it doesn't work. Tony stares at her in confusion as she falls back into the couch laughing. What? Tony frowns. I don't see how this is funny. It's not, just. Pepper takes a breath to compose herself before she smiles brightly at Tony. It's just that Peter, the boy who you've basically already been parenting, turns out to be your son. I haven't been parenting him, Tony protests. Pepper raises one of her eyebrows, almost challengingly. Honey, last month you grounded him for a week from being Spider-Man. And instead of getting lab time with you that Wednesday, you made him wash all your cars. He was Spider-Manning past his curfew. We had a deal that on school nights he has to be back at his aunt's at 11. He came home at almost midnight. On the weekends that he stays here, you cook him breakfast. He has a fast metabolism. I don't want him passing out from lack of food again. Plus, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, says the man who rarely eats. Pepper has to force herself from rolling her eyes. You fuss over him during his training. I do not fuss. Old women and mothers fuss. I watch out over him during training, Tony scoffs as he stands up, his back and knees protesting slightly. God, when did he get old? You created the scrapped knee protocols to alert you of any injuries that are worse than bruises or cuts. The kid is notorious for hiding injuries. If I didn't create that protocol, I'd never know when he's hurt himself because the idiot always thinks that he's fine. Even when his arm is broken in 2 places and is healing wrong, so he has to get it rebroken. You help him with his homework. He doesn't really need help, sometimes he just needs a little push in the direction of the correct answer. You have a copy of his report card hanging on the fridge. Between being Spider-Man, going to school, doing homework, seeing friends and coming up here, the fact that he's still maintaining good grades is something to be proud of, so of course his report card is on the fridge. It's important to show him that his hard work isn't going unnoticed and that I'm proud of Hi. Tony pauses. Oh, see, I've been parenting. Pepper nods with a soft smile on her face. You've been acting like Peter's dad for a while now and I have to say, it's a very good look on you. And you've become a lot more grown up and responsible too, which I like. Tony sits back on the couch in shock. He's been parenting Peter for the last few months without even realizing it, and it wasn't horrible, he wasn't horrible. The kid is still alive, which is the main thing, and he seems happy, which is always good. He's managed to look after a kid and keep them alive and happy. Maybe, possibly, he just might be able to actually do this. Maybe, possibly, Rhodey wasn't that crazy when he said that he was doing better than Howard. Maybe. Tony looks at Pepper. So, you're not mad or upset about this? Pepper shakes her head, shocked and maybe a little upset, but after finding out that it's Peter, honestly I'm actually rather pleased. Yeah. You know I love Peter, he's adorable and so sweet. He also has amazing manners that most teenage boys lack, Pepper smiles. He didn't get his manners from you, thank God. No, that's all down to May. She and Ben raised him, they did all the hard work and helped make him the kid he is now. A part of Tony is upset, now that he's had some time to come to terms with everything, that he didn't get the chance to be in little Peter's life. However, he knows that it was for the best because back then he was not the kind of person who should have a kid, not that he's the best option now, but he would have really messed little Peter up. He's glad that his son, that's going to take a bit of time to get used to, had May and Ben. They did such a good job raising Peter. He'll never be able to thank May enough, she's an incredible woman. Speaking of May, have you told her yet? Pepper asks. Tony shakes his head. No, I only found out about Peter barely 2 hours ago. Only you and Rhodey know at the moment, but I figured that I should tell her before Peter because she knows him best. She'll know how best to break the news to him. The thought of telling Peter about their relation sends a slight swirl of panic through him. You say it's break the news to him, like finding out you're his dad is going to be awful for him. It may be a shock and he may need some time, but he idolizes and loves you. I'm positive that he won't react as bad as you are thinking he will. Yeah, well, we'll see. Tony sighs and Pepper shakes her head at his self-deprecating thoughts. I'll talk to May tomorrow while Pete's at school. Good idea, Pepper nods. You could hash out some ideas about what's going to happen after Peter finds out, while you're there. What do you mean? Are you going to have Peter live here full-time? No, I don't want to take him away from May. She raised him and he loves her so much. For the past year it's just been them. She's all Peter has and Peter's all she has. I can't take him away. So, talk with May and do what divorced parents do. It's kind of like what you're already doing with Peter, visiting on Wednesdays and every other weekend, but make it more official. You could see if maybe you could have him for a few more days too, once Peter has had time to settle over finding out you're his father. I'd like that. Tony mouth betrays him as it twitches into a grin and it makes Pepper smile too, before she remembers the other major thing that they'll have to deal with, aside from telling Peter and May, and living arrangements. Press, Pepper sighs. Nope, Tony vehemently shakes his head, already knowing what Pepper is going to say. I don't want him to have to deal with those vultures. Neither do I, but unfortunately he'll have to eventually. Years from now if I can help it. I want him to actually have a life before the world finds out about him and then follows him everywhere, giving him no privacy. We'll keep quiet about it for as long as we can. Only people who need to know will know and they'll sign NDAs. However, we should come up with some ideas on how to handle the press, should they find out about Peter. Tony remembers practically being shoved into the flashing cameras as a child by Howard, and it was horrible and scary. There was no way he was going to do that to Peter. I think we should discuss this in more detail when Peter and May can have a say about it, Pepper suggests, and Tony nods in agreement. The two of them settle into the couch, sitting in silence, as their minds try to comprehend all that's happened in the last few hours. Pepper frowns slightly in confusion. How did you find out about Peter being your son? You've been spending time with him for months now, so how has this just been discovered? Rhodey can take all the credit for that, Tony huffs before explaining what happened when Rhodey stopped by for his visit. Chapter Tony tells May. Tony stares at the Parkers' door, just like he's been doing for the past 20 minutes. He's been trying to get the courage to knock but has only gotten to the point of raising his fist before he hesitates and lets it fall back down to his side. Being the wonderful fiancée that she is, Pepper had offered to take a couple of hours off work to come with him, but he figured that this was something that he should do alone. Though he's regretting it now since he can't even work up the nerve to knock on the door. He doesn't think he's ever been this nervous before, but how can he not be? Because May Parker is a lot like Pepper Potts. She is a woman you don't want to get on the wrong side of, a side in which he's already been on. Christ, that woman can be truly scary when she's angry and has just found out her teenage nephew is the web-slinging hero that's been swinging around Queens. He's only just started getting the woman to stop hating him, which was mostly down to Pepper working her magic and having lunch with May. Okay, maybe he's being a little dramatic. He's Tony Stark when isn't he being a bit dramatic? He and May get on reasonably well. She's never been a huge fan of his, which considering his past, he can't blame her. And of course, finding out about his part in Peter's extracurricular activities didn't do him any favors. It only got him a very painful slap. For a small woman, she has a lot of force in her swing. But after they came up with a plan for Peter, and Pepper had lunch with her, May warmed up to him a little. And now he has to tell her that Peter is his son. Tony is pretty sure she's not going to react well to the news, and that terrifies him because she could stop him from seeing Peter, and he's positive that he couldn't live his life without Peter in it. He needs Peter in his life. Even before he found out that the kid was his kid, he had to have Peter in his life. Because without him, everything seems so quiet and almost lonely. Sure, he has Pepper and Rhodey happy too, but having the kid around just seems to make everything better and brighter. So, the idea that May might be angry at him for being Peter's father and forbidding him from seeing him again is what's making him hesitate at knocking on the door. The thought kept replying in his mind all night, so he hardly got any sleep, well less than his usual amount. Pepper told him that he was worrying over nothing and that May wouldn't stop him from seeing Peter. That he was imagining that May disliked him more than what she actually did, and while she'll be shocked at the news, she wouldn't be angry at him. But, of course, he doesn't believe that because things never turn out well for him in the end. Look at what happened with the Avengers. He's still waiting for Pepper to realize she's better off without him, and he's sure that after he tells Peter he's his father that something bad is going to happen. What is he doing? Things are fine the way they are now. Does he need to tell May and Peter about sharing half of their DNA? Maybe it would just be best to not tell them and pretend like it didn't happen. That way things won't change and he can't lose Peter. Before Tony can turn around to leave, the door he'd been standing in front of, for almost half an hour, swings open. Tony? May looks at the man questioningly, surprised to find him standing in front of her door. May, heights, Tony says awkwardly, giving her a grin that looks more like a wince. Pepper texted me early and said that you'd be stopping by. I was just going to nip to the shop and get some more coffee since you nearly drained us dry the last time you visited, but you're already here. Yep, he popped the P. Of course, Pepper messaged May. She knew him too well. She knew he'd freak and try to back out. For May, it wasn't unusual for Pepper to message her. They regularly text each other and have lunch a couple of times a month. It's nice having another woman around to have some girl time with since neither of them really had many friends, they mainly had acquaintances and work friends. What is unusual is for Tony to stop by the apartment when Peter wasn't there. So, when Pepper had texted her saying the man would be stopping by because he had something to tell her, she was a little worried. Most of their conversations were based around Peter and his well-being. He'd give her weekly reports on what Peter had been up to as Spider-Man and any injuries he acquired. Unless Peter had hurt himself enough to require medical attention, then he'd call her straight away. He also backed her up with the rules that she had put in place after she found out Peter was Spider-Man, which had shocked her to start with because she was sure that the billionaire, who had given her 15-year-old nephew a super suit, wouldn't follow the rules or bother to keep Peter following them. But he did. He even grounded Peter if he broke the rules, which both pleased and shocked her. The only times that he forgot rules was when they were in the lab and they lost track of the time that Peter is supposed to be home. As much as she disliked him at the start, especially after finding out about Spider-Man, she couldn't deny that Tony had gone up in her books. She was very impressed with how he handles and looks after Peter, and how seriously he's taking Peter's safety. She saw how Tony always makes time for Peter, and she can see how much the man cares for him because she isn't blind. It's obvious, he always gets a twinkle in his eye whenever Peter is in his sight. She never thought that Tony Stark would ever be father material, but the way he is with Peter, he really is like a dad. A proud dad too, because Pepper had sent her a picture of the copy of Peter's report card on their fridge. It's also nice for Peter to have another male figure in his life, especially now in his teen years. May never thought she'd be glad to have Tony Stark around her impressionable teenage nephew, but that just proves how much things have changed. She completely trusts Tony with Peter. That's why she had asked him if he'd be Peter's secondary emergency contact for the school last month. Plus, before Tony, and frankly Pepper too, had come along, it had just been the two of them. Which, while nice, was also a little frightening. She knew that if anything had happened to her, Peter would have ended up in care. Now, however, she feels happier and secure in the knowledge that, should anything happen to her, Peter would have people to help him though it and look after him. May opens the door wider and steps to the side. "Are you going to come in and tell me what's going on? Because you're acting strange and it's making me nervous." Worry suddenly flashed across her face. "Peter's okay, isn't he?" Because May's only ever seen Tony look like this when Peter's been hurt. "Yeah, he's fine." Tony steps into the apartment, his stomach twisting horribly as he tries to keep calm. "But, this is about Peter." "Okay, what about him?" "His grades are still up, he's doing all his homework, and he hasn't broken curfew since you ground him for it the last time and made him wash your cars." Peter hasn't done anything. His fingers drum against the kitchen countertop nervously. I found something out about Peter." "Found out what?" May follows him into the kitchen. "Look, you have to know, I had no idea about this." "I swear." Tony looks over at May, then back down at his tapping fingers. "I only found out yesterday." May's voice is a little strained and it makes the man look up. "What did you find out?" "You're really starting to worry me." "I'm sorry, it's still kind of unbelievable to me and I don't know how you're going to take it." Tony lets out a long breath as he composes himself. "Peter's my son." May stares at him before she breathes a sigh of relief. "Jesus, Tony. You had me worried that something bad had happened." May sits down at the kitchen table as she shakes her head. "I have to say, I'm a little surprised, considering how emotionally constipated you tend to be, that you actually admitted that you see Peter as your son. I figured that you'd take longer to realize how much of a dad you are to him. Okay, two things. Are you and Pepper taking about me and how I apparently act like a dad to Peter when you have lunch together?" Among other things, May nods. "And two, I didn't mean I see Peter as my son, which, well, I guess I do, but I meant he is my son, like, biologically." "What?" She blinks at Tony, not fully comprehending what he just said. "I ran mine and Peter's blood against each other, and biologically, we're father and son." Tony pulls out the paternity results from his jacket that he had FRIY print out and passes them over to May. He doesn't take a seat at the table, he just nervously hovers over her. May looks over the paper that Tony handed her, and while she may not be a genius like Tony or her nephew, she is a nurse and she knows exactly what this piece of paper is saying. "What the F-?" she mutters, her eyes wide. "Yeah." Tony swallows nervously. "How did this happen? I mean, I know how." "Just F-." May puts the paper on the table and is really glad that she's already sat down. "You didn't know?" "I swear I didn't." Tony shakes his head. "Mary must have decided that it was best not to tell me, which I can't say I blame her for." I was a complete mess back then. I wouldn't have wanted little Peter to have been around the kind of person I was back in my 20s. How did you and Mary? Honestly, I don't know. She was a scientist, so it would have probably been at some convention or conference, but I can't pretend that I remember her. I would have been completely drunk, and there have been so many conventions and nights just like that I can't pick out one woman from another, Tony says, and May can hear the regret and shame in his voice. I'd love to be able to say that I remember Peter's mother and that I knew things about her that I could tell Pete, but unfortunately I can't. And you really had no idea? I've had a few women try and say I got them P-arginine, but a DNA test has quickly proven them wrong. Mary never got in contact with me or Stark Industries, and like I said, I can't really remember that night with her. Tony slides into the seat across from May so he can look into her eyes, so she can see he's being truthful. I had no idea about Peter until yesterday. I promise. So, you finding him as Spider-Man and taking him as an intern and being all parent, that's all really just a huge coincidence? I know, it's hard to believe, Tony sighs. Pepper thinks that maybe it was fate leading us together. Wow, May mutters, sitting back in her chair. Tony watches May for a moment, tapping the table again out of worry, before he can't help himself and just has to know, you're not angry at me? May frowns at him. Why would I be angry? I believe you, that you didn't know about Peter. If you had known, then I'd be said, but angry, no. So, you're not going to, I can still see Peter? What? Of course, you can still see Peter. Why wouldn't you? Especially now. I thought you might be mad that I'm Peter's father, and that you wouldn't want me to be involved with him anymore. I really understand what Pepper means when she says that for being the smartest person in the world, you can really be stupid sometimes. May shakes her head at Tony. I could never stop you and Peter from being together. You're like two peas in a pod, which now makes me wonder why I never thought about how much alike you both are. May leans in to look at Tony, grabbing his chin to pull his face closer. God, you have the same eyes. That's what Rhodey said, Tony mumbles, pulling away from May's grabby hands. Back to my point. Peter has lost so much in such a short time, and Ben's death, it really hit him hard. May pauses briefly, her mind flashing back to her husband. He became a lot more quiet and closed up, and I wasn't sure how to help him because as much as I love Peter, I think he needed a man in his life. A male role model. Then in you came, and yes, at the start I wasn't keen on you or the idea of you hanging around my nephew, but I've seen so much more of the old Peter, the one before Ben died, since you came into his life. There is no way I could turn around tell you to stop seeing Peter. It would crush Peter if he couldn't get to see you. He loves you. Tony's eyes widen at that. Oh please, May rolls her eyes. He looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. Even before you were Iron Man, Peter thought you were amazing, and now, you're practically his favorite person in the world. May smiles fondly. I could never ask you to stop seeing Peter. Plus, being a single working parent is hard, so knowing that I have you helping me out with Peter has made my stress levels drop. Only slightly, of course, since my nephew decided to become Queen's vigilante, and that doesn't help my blood pressure. Tony snorts, or mine. I wasn't gray till I met him. The joys of having kids, I'm afraid. No matter what, you'll never stop worry over them. Yet, Tony says sarcastically, might as well start buying hair dye in bulk. They sit in silence for a moment before May looks over at Tony. I trust you with Peter, and Peter is everything to me. So, I'm telling you that I trust you with my whole world. I've seen how much you care about him and how much you do for him. I know that Peter is in good hands with you. Have you forgotten who I am? Nope, but who you are now and who you were are two different people. Past Tony? Yeah, I would have kicked you out and wouldn't have let you near Peter. But you've been acting like Peter's dad for a while and he's already lost two father figures. I'm not taking another one away. Peter needs you and I need you. So, stop doubting and putting yourself down because like I said, you've already been parenting Peter and you've been doing well. There will be times when it's hard and you think you aren't doing a good job. That happens for all parents, trust me, but that's why you have me and Pepper to help you. Thank you, Tony says, because honestly, what else could he say? She wasn't taking Peter away from him and she thinks he's been doing a good job with Peter already. Why did you decide to run a paternity test on Peter yesterday? Maths. My friend Rhodey stopped by the lab yesterday when Peter was still there. He knew me back when I was the same age as Peter, and according to him, Pete looks just like I did. Tony huffs, running a hand down his face. After Peter left, he confronted me about not telling him I had a kid. One thing led to another, and with my history, I ran the paternity test, which, obviously, came back positive. The pair sit in silence for a few minutes, Tony letting May fully digest the news. She looks over the paternity results absent-mindedly, wondering how this could even be her life. Her nephew got bit by a radioactive spider and got powers from it, which led to him now becoming a superhero. The same nephew that is also Tony Stark's son. May bites her lip. When Mary told us she was pregnant and Ben, we did wonder, at the time, if the baby was actually Richard's. What? Tony's eyes widen slightly in shock. It all seemed to happen so fast. May frowns as she thinks back. She had gotten pregnant so quickly after they got together. Just weeks after Richard had introduced us to Mary, she was apparently pregnant. So, we wondered if maybe they had been together for longer than what they were claiming, or if the baby was even Richard's. Tony finishes. May nods. We never asked them about it. We didn't feel like it was our place. Besides, when Peter was born, Richard was treating him as though he was his son, so it didn't matter whether or not they were biologically related. Richard said Peter was his son, so that was that. Frankly, after Peter was born, we kind of forgot about the possibility that he wasn't Richard's. Well, family doesn't always mean the people you share blood with. Neither Rhodey nor Happy are related to me, but they are my family. Agreed. Peter isn't related to me by blood, but he's still my kid. Which brings me on to our next topic. Tony takes in a deep breath. He now knows that May won't take Peter away, but will she let him have more time with him? I might be Peter's father, but you've raised him. He wouldn't be who he is today if it wasn't for you and Ben, which I couldn't be more thankful for, so I don't want to take him away from you. May feels relief flood through her. She had been a little worried that Tony would want Peter to live with him, leaving her all alone. She couldn't keep Peter away from Tony, but she didn't want to lose Peter either. He's a part of her life. Pepper suggested that we do what we're doing now. You know, share him, like divorced parents do, but, maybe I could. May raises one of her eyebrows when nervous Tony makes a reappearance, but she thinks she understands what he's trying to ask. Have more days with Peter? If that's okay with you, and with Peter of course, Tony hopes that as he stares at May that he doesn't look like he's completely desperate for her answer to be yes. I'm sure we could work something out. May nods. Maybe on the weekends that he already stays with you, he can be dropped off on the Friday after school instead of arriving on the Saturday. Also, when I have a night shift, Peter could also stay with you. Tony nods his head vigorously, happy to accept any extra time with Peter. I'm sure that in a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, once everything settles, we can get into some kind of routine and get everything figured properly, because this is just a lot to take in right now. May sighs. I know Peter's going to need some time to get his head around all of this once you tell him. I was hoping that you'll be there when I tell him. I figured he might feel more comfortable if he has you with him, Tony says. That's probably a good idea. May thinks to how sensitive her nephew can be at times. He may react a little. Well, he may not handle the news well at first, but I promise that it won't be because he doesn't want you to be his father. He'll just need a bit of time to get his head around it. I really think you and Pepper are spending too much time together, because she said something similar to that. Great minds think alike. May smirks, then turns serious again. I'm guessing you're worried that Peter won't want you to be his dad, but I'll let you in on a little secret. A couple of weeks ago, when me and Peter were having dinner, he referred to you, Dad, without even realizing it until nearly a minute later. Tony's breathing stops for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. Peter actually sees him as a father? As his father? So, after you tell him, it may seem like he's rejecting you, but trust me, he's not. He's just going to need some time to think about it, and that usually means that he'll want to be alone to do it. Okay, Tony quietly says, hoping that she's right. Tony's phone pings, which indicates that FRI needs to talk to him. He had put her on emergency mode so that he didn't get disturbed while talking to May. So if FRI is active, then something has happened. What's going on? Tony pulls out his phone and works his fingers across the screen. The scraped knee protocol on Peter's suit has been activated, boss. Tony feels his heart stop. What? He's supposed to be in school, isn't he? Midtown School ended 23 minutes ago. May and Tony both looked to the clock in the kitchen and saw that they had been talking for longer than they realized. The reports I'm reading from Peter's suit indicate that he has a wound on his leg and it's bleeding profusely. What kind of wound? I'm not completely sure, boss, but from the readings it is an inch thick in diameter and has gone through his leg. What? Tony will later deny that his voice went up in pitch. As per the scraped knee protocol, the suit's AI is calling you. Answer it. Tony tries to take a steady breath to keep himself calm. This kid is determined to turn him completely gray. Please don't call Mr. Stark. Peter's pleading voice comes from the phone as FI answers Peter's AI call. Due to the fact that Peter had a habit of not calling for help when he gets hurt because he thinks he's fine, Tony also designed the scraped knee protocol to connect him straight away to Peter, whether the kid wants to talk or not. Clearly it was a good idea to add that on. Hey Andrews, his voice is tight. Hey Mr. Stark. I was just about to call you. Tony looks over at May, who has her face in her hands and is shaking her head. Were you now? Even though the boy can't see him, he raises an eyebrow at the phone. Yep. FRY told me you're hurt. Oh, it's nothing. Just a scratch really. However, Peter's voice sounds a little pained. Tony uses his best don't bullshit mean voice. What happened? Really, Mr. Stark? I'll be fine. My leg just got a little impaled. But it's fine. What? Both Tony and May yell. May. Peter's voice is still a little pained but is now laced with confusion. Why are you with Mr. Stark? I don't think that's what important right now, Peter. You got impaled. May's glad that she sat down because her legs don't feel very stable right now. However, she does feel slightly relieved in the fact that Peter is awake and alert. I heal quickly, remember. I'll be fine. I just have to get the pole out first and dash. Whoa. You're still impaled? Tony is already calling a suit to pick him up so he can get to Peter. Don't you dare touch it. Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you. No, Mr. Stark, that's not necessary. I'm fine. It's not even a big pole. I don't care how big the pole is. I care that it's in you. This child is unbelievable. I'm coming to get you, and if you've taken that pole out by yourself, you are going to be ground until you 30. That seems a little unreasonable, he hears Peter mutter, but he ignores the boy in favor of texting Happy to come and pick May up. Happy is going to bring you to the compound, while I go pick up the spider babies. Tony turns to May. Not a baby. He again ignores Peter's protest as he instead messages the medical bay at the compound to expect a patient. Boss, your suit has arrived and is outside waiting for you, FRI says. Thanks, FRI. Be a dear and create the quickest path to Peter's locations. Tony heads towards the door, calling to May over his shoulder. Happy should be here in about half an hour. Thank you, Tony. May stands from the table and walks Tony out. Just make sure Peter's all right. That's my job. Tony does a little salute before he quickly leaves the apartment and heads down the stairs to get to his suit. His heart is pounding so hard he can practically hear it. It hasn't even been a full 24 hours since he found out he has a son, and said son is already hurt. Logically, he knows that if he hadn't have found out Peter was his kid, Pete still would have gotten hurt, but he still feels like it's his fault. It really is fine, Mr. Stark. It doesn't even hurt that much, Peter. Tony almost forgot that the boy was still on the phone. Are you really trying to lie to me? Tony shakes his head in exasperation. Your leg has a pole jammed into it. Of course it hurts, and it most certainly isn't fine. His latest suit, Mark 56, opens up as he walks towards it, allowing him to quickly slip inside. FRI automatically suches Peter's call from his phone to his suit as it closes up. Show me where he is, girl, Tony says, and the pre-made route is displayed for him. Peter mentally groans, instead of groaning out loud because Mr. Stark is still on the phone, as he hears the distinct sound of the Iron Man repulsors getting closer. It had barely been 5 minutes since Karen had snitched on him to Mr. Stark. Stupid scraped knee protocol. It's not like he's a baby. He doesn't need to be patched up every time he gets a little scratch. Okay, this is a little more than a scratch, but still. Once the pole is out, his healing will take care of it. He'll be good as new within a few days. Although, it would be really nice to have some of his specially made painkillers right about now. They make him drowsy, but they also make the pain go away. It wasn't even his fault that he got this pole in his leg, not really. It was MJ's. He caught her walking home from school as he started his patrol, and he got distracted by the way her hair bounced as she walked, the way the weak winter sun reflected off her smooth skin, the way that she looks appealing even in her casual jumper and jeans. She distracted him so much that he forgot to shoot a web, as he was totally not following her home, and even if he was, it was to make sure she got there safe, and he ended up falling into an ally. An ally that had a bunch of broken poles leaning against one of the dumpsters. Mr. Stark is going to tease the hell out of him for this. Speaking of, the Iron Man suit comes into view and it lands a few feet away from him. It opens up and Tony quickly stumbles out and crouches next to Peter. Even though the only reported injury is the pole in the boy's leg, he still gives him a quick once-over just to make sure that there aren't any other major injuries. Carefully checking there aren't any people around, he pulls of the Spider-Man mask, so he can look over Pete's face too. Once he's happy that it's just the kid's leg, he lets his eyes roam over it. Christ underoos, Tony mutters. He knew that Peter had a pole in his leg, but actually physically seeing it just makes it real. The kid, his kid, has somehow managed to get an actual pole in his leg. It's just a little impalement, Peter says weakly. No impalement is little Peter. Tony's voice raises slightly, and he feels bad because Peter winces at it. Don't be like Howard. Don't screw this up. It's going to be fine, Pete. I'm going to carry you back to the compound and the doctors will fix you up. Can't I just pull it out and let my healing do the rest? Peter pouts, and if Peter's health wasn't on the line, Tony would let him pull it out because that diamond pout and those diamond puppy eyes. Kiddo, you're in a dirty ally. The pole is in a dirty ally and there's no telling how long it's been here. It could have all sorts of nasty germs and diseases on it. Sure, your healing should fix you up and anything that pole has on it shouldn't affect you, but I'd rather have the doctors take a look at it. Plus, we don't know if the pole has caused any damage inside your leg. Peter frowns but nods. Fine. Don't worry, you'll only see the doctors that already know you're Spider-Man. Knowing how much trouble Peter always manages to find, Tony figured it was best to have a couple of doctors know who the boy really was so that they would be able to treat him properly, due to his different DNA. Tony, of course, had them sign NDAs so Spider-Man's identity would still remain a secret. Do you think you can web the pole in place so it doesn't move around and cause any more damage? Peter nods, wincing as he adjusts his position slightly to start securing the pole. Tony takes this time to try and calm his fast-beating heart. Peter was fine, apart from the obvious injury, and he'll get patched up in the safe hands of qualified doctors. This kid really is trying to give him a heart attack. Even before he found out that Peter was his son, whenever he got hurt it always sent a rush of panic through him, showing just how much Peter had wormed his way into Tony's life. He didn't think he'd see Peter so soon after finding out that he's the kid's real father. He thought he'd have a few days to work out how to tell him since he wasn't supposed to see him till the weekend. He figured he could maybe write a script on what he wants to say to Peter when he tells him, or maybe just bullet point important things to remember to say. Now though, all he can do is look at Peter and start picking out what the kid got from him or his family and what the kid must have got from his mother. He can see what Rhodey and May meant when they said they had the same eyes. Peter is just somehow able to use them better than he ever could, especially when he adds in his pout. They have the same jawline too. Their noses aren't exactly the same. Peter's looks more like his mother's. Wow, it's been a little bit since he thought of his mum and it not be because of Rogers. Quickly moving on, he remembers the curls that Peter has in the mornings when he has breakfast, before he's had chance to gel them down, and he remembers how much they annoyed him when he was younger and went to MIT. However, on Peter, they look so good. Makes the kid look younger, especially with the baby fat the kid still has in his cheeks. He should make the kid stop putting gel in his hair. Let the curls run wild. Really, the only main thing that Tony can pick out that's obviously different from him and Peter is his mouth. Peter must get his mouth from Mary or someone from her family because it isn't from him. But other than that, he can totally see what Rhodey was talking about and he's kicking himself for not seeing it sooner. Oh, Mr. Stark? Peter's voice brings him back from his thoughts. Yeah, kiddo? I said I was finished, And you've just been staring at me for like a full minute. Peter raises an eyebrow up in a silent question of, why were you staring at me? I wasn't staring anyway, let's get you out of here. I've only been here 2 minutes and I feel like I need 5 showers to get the dirt off of me. Tony quickly changes the subject and climbs back into his suit as Peter puts his mask back on. The Iron Man suit lifts Peter up bridal style, slowly and gently so that the leg nor pole get moved too much. This is so embarrassing, Peter grumbles as they take off towards the compound. Can't you carry me a different way, instead of bridal? Well, if you insist on getting hurt, then you can think of this as a form of punishment to try and encourage you to be more careful. You can't punish me for getting hurt. It was an accident even though he can't see Peter's face. Tony knows the boy is pouting. How exactly did you get accidentally hurt? And Tony immediately knows something happened because the boy clammed up, and Peter always has something to say. Peter. It was nothing. I just fell? Peter says it more like a question than a statement. You just fell? Tony's voice is full of disbelief. Yeah. Oh, then say I believe that. How did you just fall, Pete? I just did. You do remember I can just watch what happened via the baby monitor protocol, right? Peter sighs in defeat. I did fall, I just got a little distracted. You're telling me that you let yourself get distracted while you were swinging around? Do you know how dangerous that is, Peter? You could have ended up a lot worse than having a pole in your leg. Tony can feel his blood pressure raising again. I know, but it's not like I meant it to happen. Peter huffs. When you're on patrol you need to stay focused at all times. I won't let it happen again. You better not, or you'll be grounded until you can learn how to not get distracted so easily. Do you understand? Peter would argue, but he could hear the tone of Mr. Stark's voice, and it was a tone that said, don't even try and talk back. Yes, sir, Peter mumbles. Good. Now, what were you distracted by? What? Well, you usually are pretty vigilant with your spidey sense and everything. So, what caused you to get distracted? A cat? Peter knows he's never been good at lying, but this is bad. Even for him. A cat? It was a fat cat. A fat cat caused you to lose focus and fall into a disgusting ally? Tony's voice is flat, and he's completely done with this. A very fat cat? Again? Baby monitored protocols. Tony reminds the young superhero. Peter groans, you're only going to laugh at me. Whatever it is, caused you to get distracted and hurt yourself, so I don't think I'll laugh. I saw MJ walking home from school. Peter says quietly in the hopes that Mr. Stark won't hear him. Your friend, MJ? Unfortunately, he does hear him. Yeah, I kinda started following her home, which sounds like I was stalking her, but I wasn't. I was just making sure she got home safe, you know, because that's the kind of thing Spider-Man does. Peter is glad that he's wearing the mask so Mr. Stark can't see how red he is. Why can't he just be normal around girls he likes? He was weird when he liked Liz too, right? Tony says slowly, so, you started following her home and got distracted? Yeah. By her? Yet Peter sighs. Tony can't stop the smirk that's spreading across his face. His son has a crush. So you like her? That's cute, kiddo. Peter groans loudly. It's not cute, Mr. Stark. This is serious. I have to unlike her because I don't want to ruin our friendship, but it's so hard to not like her more than a friend because she's amazing and appealing and smart and really scary, but in a good way. If there is a good way to be scary, and she's perfect. She cares about a lot of issues that most people don't. And she doesn't care how she looks, yet she still looks appealing in whatever she's wearing. She funny too and does these drawings of people that are really good, and it's awesome whenever she knocks Flash's ego down with only a sentence. And did I mention that she's smart? Because she is. Tony whistles and tries not to laugh at the poor boy. Sounds like you're screwed, kiddo, because you have been well and truly bit by the love bug. I know, Peter pouts. What am I going to do? You know, you could always try asking her out, Tony suggests as the compound comes into view. This is the sort of thing fathers and sons talk about, right? Helping out with love advice. Not that Peter should really take advice from him about love and romance considering what his past is like. Mr. Stark. I can't do that. Anyone would have thought he asked the kid to kick a puppy at how horrified Peter sounded. Did you not hear the part where I said I don't want to ruin our friendship? Well, what if she likes you back? That wouldn't be ruining your friendship, it would be starting a relationship that started with the foundations from your friendship. Those are the strongest relationships, or so Pepper tells me anyway. I don't know. Peter bites his lip nervously. I think I'll stick with not telling her. And just continue following her home and pining after her from a distance. Yeah, I think I'm fine with that for now. Tony shakes his head but knows that there isn't any point in pushing the matter at the moment. Peter can be pretty stubborn at times, which he can now say that he probably gets from him. Tony lands on the landing pad at the compound, and because he already contacted the doctors at Maze, he deposits the kid onto the waiting gurney. I don't think I need a gurney, Peter tries to protest. And how are you thinking of getting to the medbay? Hopping? Walking on your hands? Or did you want me to continue carrying you down there? Tony steps out of the suit and raises an eyebrow at Peter. I'll just take the gurney. Thoughts so Tony nods at the doctors and they start taking Peter towards the elevator, Tony following close behind. Chapter Peter finds out. Due to the fact that Peter's identity as Spider-Man is a secret and, because of said secret, the boy spends a bit of time in the medbay, Tony set up a private room just for him. It's at the end of the medbay and only the staff who signed the NDAs and know of Peter's identity have access to the room. Well, apart from himself, Peter, Pepper, Happy and May of course. Since it's Peter's room, and only Peter's room, Tony may have personalized it a little. He couldn't go crazy, like he did with Peter's actual room at the compound, because it's still a medical room, but he was able to change the bed covers to Star Wars ones. Those made the boy go red when he saw them the first time. Tony also made sure that the room had comfy seats because he wasn't going to get a numb but sitting in a crappy chair waiting for the spider child to wake up. Like he's doing now. Tony looks up from Peter's sleeping form when he hears the door open and sees May walk in. Hey, Tony sits up in his chair, stretching his back. He had been slightly hunched over as he sat next to Peter's bed. He'd been having an inner debate in his head about whether or not he should hold the sleeping boy's hand. How is he? May asks, her face fully displaying her worry as she makes her way further into the room and sits in the chair on the other side of Peter's bed. Her hand immediately attaching itself to Peter's and her other hand settling in the boy's hair, slowly stroking the curls. Fine. He managed to get his leg impaled by a pole, but the doctors took it out and stitched him up after they checked that there wasn't any internal damage. Gave him some of his pain meds while they did it and now he's just sleeping it off, Tony explains. He'll need to be off his leg for the next day at least. So, no school tomorrow, but he should be fully healed by Monday. May blinks at Tony in shock. He got impaled by a pole? In his leg? May shakes her head and sighs. Only Peter could manage to do that to himself. Yep. The kid is amazing at finding spectacular ways to hurt himself. How did he manage to impale himself? Turns out, Petey has a little crush, Tony smirks. He saw her when he was starting his patrol and got distracted because he was watching her, causing him to fall and get hurt. Peter likes someone? Who? May lets a smile form on her face. Is it MJ? Because he's been talking about her a lot more recently. Got it in one. Good, I like her, May hums her approval, her hand still absent-mindedly stroking Peter's hair. Since it's Friday tomorrow and he needs to keep off his leg, he might as well stay here. Especially since it's his weekend here anyway. Well, that way I can keep an eye on him for when he inevitably ignores our orders and tries to walk because Peter is Peter, and of course he's going to not listen to the doctor and will try to use his leg. May nods her head in agreement, because she knows what her nephew is like. There's a gentle knock on the door and it opens slightly, Pepper poking her head into the room. I heard that Peter got hurt. Pepper opens the door and steps in. My meeting ended early and my last one isn't for a couple of hours, so I figured I'd have a little time to come and check in on our kid. How is he? Our kid? Tony smiles at that. May's, Tony's and Pepper's kid, because it's a simple fact that any kid of Tony's was going to be hers too, and it was great how amazing Pepper is being about it all. Good? Well, he will be after some rest, Tony answers as Pepper walks over to sit on the armrest of Tony's chair. So, did Tony manage to tell you the news before Peter got hurt? Pepper looks over at May. May lets out a sigh. Yeah. Still trying to get my head around it, to be honest. Pepper nods. After everything that we've been through, I still didn't see this coming. I mean, I did think that there was a possibility that Tony would have a child or two out there, but finding out his child is the one he's already been getting to know, it's kind of crazy. You're telling me? I never in a million years could have ever thought my nephew was Tony Stark's son, nor did I think I'd be okay with him being Peter's father, but here we are. Yes, we are, me included. Tony sulks. So, if you could not talk about me like I'm not here, that would be great. Sure, we'll just save talking about you for our lunch. Pepper smiles sweetly at her fiancé. Thanks. Tony rolls his eyes. You're welcome. Pepper turns back to May. Did Tony ask you about the possibility of having more days with Peter? Yes, I did. Tony huffs. I can do things by myself sometimes. Pepper and May share an amused look with each other, then May leans back in her chair slightly. The hand in Peter's hair leaving, but the hand holding Peter's still firmly in place. I'm fine with Peter spending more time with Tony, but it'll probably be best to figure out a routine once Peter's had time to adjust to everything. I think that's a good idea, and Pepper agrees. We just want to do what's best for Peter and what he's comfortable with. That reminds me. The press. May bites her lip and looks at Tony. You're a famous billionaire and you're Iron Man. The second the press find out you have a son, they're going to be all over him. Pepper looks at Tony with a raised eyebrow. I thought this was one of the things you were supposed to talk with May about. I was going to get to that, but before I could, somebody decided to jam a pole in his leg. Tony huffs before he gives May his most reassuring look. Trust me, I don't want those vultures anywhere near Peter. His eyes sweep over Peter's face before looking back at May. We are going to keep this as quiet as we can for as long as we can. Anyone who gets informed about who Peter is will have to sign NDAs. At the moment, the only people who we're going to tell will be the lawyers and the PR team. It's best for them to know about Peter so they can prepare for when the press do find out about him, because unfortunately they will find out eventually. Pepper sighs. Because they're vultures, Tony almost growls. He grew up having to look over his shoulder for cameras and journalists who were looking for their 15 minutes of fame whenever he went out. Eventually he stopped caring about the cameras, about the same time he stopped trying to impress his father, and that's when the photos of him drunk in clubs started appearing in papers. The same thing will not happen to his son. Peter shifts slightly and lets out a soft indicating to the three adults in the room that he was waking up. May moves to the edge of her seat, sitting closer to Peter as he wakes, and Tony unconsciously does the same. Pepper threads her hand into Tony's hair at the nape of his neck, hoping to give some comfort to her fiancé. Peter scrunches up his face and lifts his hand, that isn't being held by May, to rub over his face. He blinks a few times before his eyes open fully. Hey sweetie. May smiles at him. May. Peter smiles back, slightly groggy from the pain meds that are still in his system. How are you feeling? Fine. May raises an eyebrow. Really? Peter nods. Okay then. May's smiles turns more into a smirk. Tony tells me you have a crush. Peter's smile is wiped clean off his now red face and he groans, closing his eyes. Why would you do that, Mr. Stark? He whines. Consider it part of your punishment for not paying attention on patrol. Tony smirks. Peter just covers his face with his hand. It was just so embarrassing. It was bad enough that he got so distracted by MJ that he fell, but having May and Mr. Stark know about his crush? He's never going to hear the end of it. He sighs, looking on the bright side. At least MJ didn't see him fall, or at least he's pretty sure she didn't, because if she did, well, he may as well just die from embarrassment now. Dropping his hand, he looks over to his other side to look at Mr. Stark. How is my leg? Luckily the pole, somehow, didn't do any damage to your leg. He has no idea how there was no damage. But Tony isn't going to question it. You'll need to keep off it for a day, doctor's orders, and when I say off it I mean you will be resting in bed and not hopping about anywhere. Peter gives Tony an offended look at the implied tone in his mentor's voice that suggested that he'd go against the doctor's orders, but Tony just raises an eyebrow back because they both know that Peter would try to get out of resting. Since you have to stay off your leg, you won't be going to school tomorrow. May picks up the conversation, and we figured that since tomorrow is Friday, that you might as well stay here since it is your weekend at the compound anyway. Peter grins. He was definitely okay with having an extra day with Mr. Stark at the compound, even if he has to rest. He has enhanced healing. Surely he doesn't have to stay off his leg all day, right? For now, It's probably best if you get some more rest, May says, returning her hand to Peter's hair and stroking. Resting always helps move things along better. Tony nods in agreement. We'll wake you up when it's time to feed that spider baby belly of yours. Peter's grown at the nickname, but till then, it's best to go back to sleep because I know that the meds are still running through your body right now, which means you're already feeling tired anyway. Peter pouts and attempts to glare, but the effect is ruined by two things. 1. Peter basically looks like a puppy, so he can rarely pull off a glare. Only when he's actually and extremely set off do his glares work. And 2. The big yawn that escapes the boy's mouth, followed by his eyelids that are starting to flutter shut. May? Stop it, Peter mumbles as he tries to move his head away from May's hand. Nope, May continues running her hand gently through her nephew's hair. Go to sleep. Peter's eyes finally shut completely as another yawn, smaller than the last one, leaves his mouth. Fair. Tony's eyes flicker from the now sleeping Peter to May in shock. How did you do that? I was certain he'd fight off sleeping for longer than that. He usually does. He likes his hair played with. May smiles warmly at Peter, always has. Even as a baby he liked having a hand stroking his head, and it almost always helped get him off to sleep, even when he didn't want to, and it's something he's not grown out of. May stops stroking Peter's hair and sits back in her chair. When he first came to live with me and then after his parents died, he'd have nightmares and he didn't want to sleep. All we'd have to do is lay in bed with him and play with his hair for about 10 minutes and he'd be out like a light, May explains. It was the same after Ben died. Well, that's useful information to know for when he's being difficult about sleeping in the future. I'll just slide his hair. Tony's mouth twitches into a small but happy smile, because seriously? How does this kid manage to continue getting cuter? It just proves that he's even more like Utes. Pepper huffs, her face full of amusement. Tony frowns. What's that supposed to mean? You like having someone run their hands through your hair. It may not put you to sleep like it does with Peter, but still it's just another thing that he must get from you. As if to prove her point, Pepper resumes threading her hand through the back of his hair, and Tony can't deny that it feels so nice. His eyes flicker back to Peter and he still just can't believe that he has a son. That he helped to create half of this kid laying in the bed on front of him. You know, I've never seen a teenager pull off looking adorable like Peter can. Pepper coos as she looks at Peter while he sleeps. I mean, look at his curls and that little pout he has. I think the fact that he still has a little baby fat in his cheeks help with that. May smiles as she reaches over to give Peter's cheek a slide. There's another knock on the door before it opens to reveal Happy, who was wedging himself in the doorway as though to prevent anyone else entering. I figured it wouldn't be a problem, but I thought I'd better check. Rhodey, he can come in here, right? He knows about the kid. Yet Tony nods but frowns because how did Rhodey know Peter was hurt? Happy opens the door further and moves to the side to allow Rhodey in, and Rhodey rolls his eyes as he walks past Happy and mutters, I told you I knew about the kid. Happy merely rolls his eyes back as he closes the door. How's the kid? While he may grumble here and there about the kid being annoying and how he never shuts up, the truth was, Peter had grown on him, kind of like a fungus, but still somehow the kid made him care about him. So, he wanted to make sure the boy was okay. Yeah, he's going to be fine. He just needs a day of rest and he'll be crawling on the ceiling like normal, Tony states before standing up to give Rhodey his seat. Honey Bear, how did you know Peter was in the med bay? Didn't. I came by to see you and Fadawai told me you were here with Peter. Rhodey sits down in the chair that Tony vacated. I stopped by to check on you since you basically got a bombshell dropped on you yesterday. I wasn't just going to leave you to deal with it. Happy frowns. What's going on? What bombshell? Tony blinks and looks to Happy and then to the rest of the people in the room. We forgot to fill Hap in on the news. We forgot? It's your news, Tony. Rhodey shakes his head, a smirk playing on his lips. What news? Happy narrows his eyes. News involving Tony was normally not so good. Tony takes a deep breath. Peter's my son. What? Happy says slowly because, what? Peter. He's mine. You know, my flesh and blood. He's biologically my child. My SPRM helped create him. He's made up of my DNA. He dash. I think he understands. Tony. Pepper interrupts him. You really could have just stopped after the first part. I didn't need to hear the SPRM bit. Disgust flashes across May's face. You've gone a little pale there, Happy. Rhodey leans back in his chair, enjoying the moment. Peter is your son. Happy's eyes widen. Apparently so's Tony nods. Peter, the kid who can literally just walk into trouble on accident? It was you who said that Peter's self-preservation skills are as bad as mine. Tony shrugs. Now we know why. I knew Peter was like you in a lot of ways, but, oh God, 2 Tonys. Happy shakes his head as Rhodey muffles his laughter. I can't handle another Tony. The first one gave me gray hair and health problems. Hey, Tony protests. Pepper rolls her eyes. Honey, be realistic. Looking after you and making sure you didn't get yourself killed was not an easy job. Not at all, Rhodey mutters in agreeance. Happy's right, all my gray hairs are because of you. Where's the loyalty? Tony glares at everyone, apart from May and Pepper, because he values his life. You gave me gray hair before I was 30. Then you'll be happy to know that karma exists because Tony is constantly saying how Peter is turning him gray. May says, smirking at Tony, before giving Rhodey a polite smile. Hi, I don't think we've met. I'm May, Peter's aunt. Rhodey. It's nice to meet you. Tony said that you raised Peter, and from everything that I've heard about the kid, it sounds like you've done an amazing job. Rhodey smiles back, and it definitely feels good to know karma works. I'm sorry, can we get back to the fact that Tony has a kid and that kid is Peter? Happy's voice sounds a little strangled and he still looks a shade paler than normal. When exactly did you find out about this? Well, thanks to Rhodey, I found out about Peter yesterday after the kid went home, Tony says. I came by yesterday to see this intern that Pepper had been telling me about, only for the intern to be Peter, Rhodey explains. When I saw the kid I thought he was Tony's because of how much he looked almost exactly like Tony did back at MIT at his age. After Peter left, I asked Tony about it. He freaked out and ran a paternity test that obviously came back positive. Tony scoffs, I did not freak out. Rhodey rolled his eyes but doesn't comment because he knows his friend wouldn't want him to bring up the fact that he had a couple of panic attacks. Does the kid know? Happy asks, finally stepping further into the room. And there's that tight clenching around his heart again at the thought of telling Peter and Peter rejecting him. Well, not yet. Didn't really get the chance with the fact the kid got himself injured, again. Karma, Rhodey mutters and Tony glares at him. When are you going to tell Peter? I know you said you'd like me to be there, but I don't think telling him now would be a good thing. With him not being able to move because of his leg, May gives a gentle look because she knows that Tony isn't as emotionless as he portrays and that he'll be hurt at the idea that Peter will want space. Like I said early, after you tell Peter, he's going to want some time to think about everything, and he'll want that time to be away from you so he can collect his thoughts properly. So, telling him now, when he'll then have to spend the next day and the weekend here, it wouldn't end well. Tony nods and swallows the hurt down at the thought of Peter not wanting him around. Then maybe Sunday evening? Before Happy takes the kid home, he could bring you up and we'll tell him then. That way he'll have a few days to process everything, or well, he can have as long as he needs. I can postpone his visits here until he feels comfortable to come back. Tony shuts up before he starts to ramble even more. That sounds like a good idea, Pepper agrees, her hand moving to hold Tony's in reassurance. So, hopefully the next time I see the kid, I should be Uncle Rhodey. The man grins, hoping to break the anxiety that was being to form in his best friend. Actually, I will be Uncle Rhodey because I won't answer to anything else. Happy rolls his eyes, because if anyone should be the uncle it should be him. He's known the kid longer. Well, I need to get going or I will be late for my next meeting. Pepper brushes a kiss to Tony's cheek. I'll drive you, Happy says, already opening the door. Would you mind dropping me back home as well? May stretches as she stands up and looks at Tony. Now I know Peter is okay, I'll leave him in your hands. I'll keep you updated in case he decides to be stupid and walk on his legs. Tony drops down into the seat that May left. I'll see you on Sunday. May gives Tony a reassuring smile before she plants a kiss on Peter's forehead and follows Happy out of the room. Pepper squeezes his shoulder. I'll be home later, love you. Love you too, Tony says before Pepper leaves Peter's hospital room. Silences fills the now much more empty room for a few moments. Tony taking in the sight of Peter and Rhodey watching Tony. He's suddenly hit with just how much his best friend has changed and grown as he sees the gentle relaxed look on Tony's face as he looks at the kid. It's the kind of look that he rarely gets to see because of how closed of the man had always been. Yet, in only 24 hours he's seen that look several times. Either because he was looking at the kid or talking about the kid. Rhodey is extremely grateful for Peter Parker. He's grateful that the kid managed to wiggle his way into Tony's life, because even before the man found out about their blood relation, it was clear from the small interaction that he witnessed and everything that Pepper had told him, that Peter was giving his best friend a second chance at life. A happier, more relaxed life. Exactly what he deserves after everything he's been through and sacrificed. "How long are you here for?" Tony asks, looking away from Peter. "A week. Then I have to head back to the base." Rhodey pauses, not really wanting to bring up the Accords and ruin the peace, but also needing to know if there had been any developments. "How have the Accords been going?" "Slow. Ross is AD, and he's being difficult," Tony huffs. Rhodey smirks. "We already knew that. Some of the countries are okay with the amendments I've asked for, others are on the fence, and a few are being as difficult as Ross. Though I think that if Ross wasn't involved or around to stir up trouble, that things would be going both faster and smoother. I still wonder how he got this role." "Me too," Tony sighs. "Anyway, if the Accords get the changes I want, it's still a matter of getting the Rouge Avengers to sign, which could be problematic since Rogers couldn't even be bothered to read the last one before he ran off." Tony knows that Rogers and his band of merry men will be reluctant to sign anything, even though they need to be held accountable for damages and such, which is what the Accords is about. What it was always primarily about, if the man had even bothered to read it. Anything else in the Accords, especially anything added in by Ross, has to go, but they have to be responsible for what they do. At the moment, while I try to get the amended Accord through, I'm trying to find a way to get Barton and Lang home for their kids sooner. I'm trying to get the committee to agree to some kind of house arrest or something, Tony adds. Again, that means that Barton and Lang would have to agree to it, and the hell if I know if they'll take it. They probably won't because they don't like nor trust me. I think if you give them the opportunity to see their families, they'll take it. "We'll see," Tony shrugs, his face wandering from Rhodey back over to Peter. "Actually, they'll take it. Just have to get all the countries to agree too. Fingers crossed, though I'm sure that you'll get them to agree with you. You usually manage to get everyone to give you what you want." Rhodey relaxes more in his chair and looks over Peter, who was now curled up like a ball in his medical bed. "How does a teenage boy manage to look adorable?" Tony groans. "Wait till he's awake and giving you his puppy eyes. It's literally impossible to resist." After waking Peter up later in the evening for dinner and feeding the boy, the doctor stopped by to check him over and agreed to let Peter leave the medbay with the reminder that the boy has to keep off his leg for the next day. Much to Peter's annoyance, Mr. Stark was taking the doctor's orders seriously because he made the boy sit in a wheelchair and he wheeled him up to his room. There wasn't much left of the day after that, so all Peter did was text Ned and watch countless BuzzFeed videos until he fell asleep for the night. In the morning, Tony helped Peter into the living room and settled the boy down on the couch, because Peter didn't want to be stuck in his room all day and at least there he can watch the TV. Once he got Peter on the couch, Tony then started piling pillows and blankets on and around the boy to help make him comfy. Peter had no idea that there were so many pillows in the compound, or even just in Mr. Stark's floor at the compound. It was ridiculous. He was practically buried under them. After making sure Peter could breathe under the pile, Tony had to go to a meeting. While he was no longer the CEO and didn't have to attend as many meetings as he used to, he's still the owner and still has certain meetings that he unfortunately can't avoid. Well, he could avoid them, but then he'd have to change his name and move to a new country because Pepper would hunt his butt down. Luckily, it was only the one meeting and it was only a few hours. So, once it was over with, he could join Peter on the couch and binge-watch The Big Bang Theory. Tony felt rather content, happy to relax with his son, who didn't know he was his son. He was going to enjoy this weekend and soak up all the time he had with Peter while he could, because who knows what's going to happen once he tells Peter the truth. Once Pepper finished work, she also joined them on the couch, with Thai takeout. Though they instead decide to watch a movie, well, Pepper wanted to watch a movie and both Peter and Tony agreed because you should always agree with Pepper, no matter what. After that, Tony decided it was time for Peter to go to bed, and he let the boy walk to his room by himself since his 24-hour rest was up. When Peter woke up on Saturday, he felt a lot better because he was now allowed to walk on his leg, and he was ready for his weekend at the compound. A normal weekend at the compound would usually consist of Peter, and sometimes Tony, sleeping in until at least then the pair would have brunch and then spend the afternoon training Peter, as per one of May's conditions for Peter being Spider-Man. Then on Saturdays they'd relax in the evening after dinner by watching a movie or two, and on Sundays Happy would take Peter back to his aunt's in the evening. This weekend, however, due to Peter's leg, it would be slightly different. While his leg is better and he can walk on it, both Tony and the doctor agreed that he should still take it easy for a couple of days just to make sure it's alright. Which means training is off the table, and instead the training part of the weekend is replaced with working in the lab. Which Peter does not mind at all. Not one bit, because who wouldn't want more lab time? So, he and Mr. Stark spent the weekend mostly in the lab, apart from the time in the evening when Pepper forced them to stop. It was one of the best weekends he's had at the compound so far. Though, he did notice that Mr. Stark was acting a little off. The man kept staring at him a lot. And he spent a lot of time just twiddling with his tools instead of actually doing anything with them. It was almost like he was fiddling with them because he was nervous. But why would Mr. Stark be nervous? Also, the bots were acting odd as well. All three of them were paying him more attention than they usually do. Dummy kept trying to give him oil smoothies, which he's never done before. You kept following him around the lab anytime he got up, while Butterfingers kept trying to help him with his web shooters. Usually the bots mind their own business in the corner of the lab and sometimes come over to cause mischief, but this time they just seemed to want to be around him for some reason. Tony was bewildered by the bots and their sudden fascination with Peter, until he remembered that they were there when he found out Peter was his son. Clearly, they figured that meant he was their new brother and now won't leave him alone. He found it quite sweet. Tony was a little surprised that working with Peter in the lab after finding out he was his son didn't feel any different to before he found out. Although he did spend more time staring at Peter than usual, but that was mostly because he couldn't help himself and he just wanted to keep finding what Peter got from him and what he must have gotten from Mary. Before either Peter or Tony knew it, it was Sunday evening and time for Peter to go home. Tony stands nervously by the couch, shifting from one foot to another, waiting for both Peter to come into the room and for May to arrive. He's gripping on to the paternity results firmly and his palms feel sweaty. God, he feels like he's going to be sick. Pepper had, again, offered to be here with him, but Tony thought that it should just be him, May and Peter. Though he did ask her to stay nearby in case he did need her. Are you okay, Mr. Stark? Peter's voice startles Tony from the panic that was beginning to tighten around his chest. Yep, all good kiddo. Tony gives a tight smile and he knows he's not fooling Peter. What's wrong? You've been acting weird all weekend. Peter frowns, biting his lip. He was worried that he'd done something to upset or disappoint his mentor. Maybe him getting distracted and hurting his leg on patrol made him more mad than he thought. Have I done something wrong? What? No. You've done nothing wrong, Pete. But I do need to talk to you about something before Happy takes you home. Peter feels dread wash over him. Mr. Stark may have said that he'd done nothing wrong, but the tone of his voice clearly said that something was wrong. The doors to the elevator glide open and May walks in. She gives Tony a reassuring smile because she can see the man is practically bouncing with nerves. May? Why are you here? Now Peter is totally confused, though he's still worried. We figured it was best that I was here for this, May says, sitting down on the end of the couch, pulling Peter down with her. Okay, now I'm really freaked out. Don't be, it's not anything bad, it's just surprising and it may take a little time to get used to. May runs a hand through his hair a couple of times to try and help calm her nephew. On Wednesday, you met my friend Rhodey. Tony starts, taking a seat on the coffee table so that he could sit opposite Peter. Well, Rhodey knew me back when I was your age and well, he basically said that you looked just like I did back then. Peter's face brightened up and a small smile formed on his lips. Really? Tony nods, his heart warmed at the thought that Peter seemed happy that he looked like him. Yep. You look so much like me that Rhodey thought you were my kid and that got me thinking, because of my past, well, I can't sugarcoat it because pretty much everyone knows I had a wild life, that I slept around Dash. Peter's face scrunches up in disgust. Yes, he knew that Tony had slept with a lot of women, But he didn't need to hear about it. You don't have to go into detail. Right? Sorry. Tony pauses, fiddling with the paternity papers in his hand. Like I said, I started thinking about how you looked like me in my past, and I started wondering if there was a possibility that, Tony looks at May because he has no freaking clue how to say it. May nods to the papers in his hands and he sighs. Look, Peter, there's no easy way for me to tell you this, but you're my son. Peter blinks and then frowns. What? The reason why you look like me is because you're my son. It takes Peter a moment to realize that Tony was holding out some papers for him. He takes them hesitantly and looks at them. They're paternity results. Positive paternity results. Positive paternity results with his name and Tony's name on them. I had no idea about you until this week. Your mother never told me about you, not that I blame her. She was only doing what she thought was best for you, and I wouldn't have made a good father 15 years ago. Peter could hear Tony talking, but he sounded funny. Like he was underwater. He could feel May next to him, her arm around him, but at the same time he couldn't actually feel her. Just the weight of her arm. It felt kind of hard to breathe. Richard Parker wasn't his dad, Tony Stark was. It felt like everything was a lie. Peter, honey? May says softly, her hand threading through his hair to try and coax the boy out of wherever his mind has gone. Peter clutches the paternity results in his trembling fingers. He takes in a shaky breath. Can we go home? He looks to May. I can't, I need to. Of course, sweetie, May says gently, her eyes flickering over to Tony. She could see the devastation in his face. No matter how much she and Pepper told him that given some time Peter will be fine with the idea that he's his son, it wasn't going to stop the man feeling rejected. Peter practically races to the elevator, almost running into the doors because he got there so quick. May on the other hand squeezes Tony's shoulder and offers him a smile. Just give him some time, she says before she follows after Peter. Once the elevator doors close, sending the Parkers down to Happy, Tony stays sat on the coffee table, unable to move because his son just ran from him. With his elbows resting on his knees, he lowers his face into his hands and tries to take steady breaths, but all he could think about was Peter's retreating figure. He felt shattered. Pepper slips into the room and quickly makes her way to her distraught fiancé. Tony lifts his head up long enough to wrap his arms around her waist and then bury his face into her stomach. Pepper simply holds him, one hand gently stroking his hair. He'll be fine. He just needs a few days to wrap his head around this, Pepper says softly. Peter had gone to his room pretty much immediately after they arrived back to their apartment and had stayed there the rest of the evening. Just lay on his bed, the paternity results still in his hands because he had completely forgot he had them. He didn't get much sleep that night. May offered to call the school and let him have Monday off, but Peter needed to get out and have some kind of distraction. Any distraction, because he can't think about Mr. Stark or the paternity results. However, all he can think about is Mr. Stark and the paternity results. Peter's lost count of the amount of times Ned had nudged him throughout the morning when he noticed that he wasn't paying attention in class. Eventually lunch rolls around, but before they can go to the lunch hall, Ned drags Peter into the boys' bathroom. What's going on with you, Peter? I've never seen you so distracted. Ned watches his friend, concern written all over his face. He was pretty sure Peter was fine. Over the weekend because his friend had texted him plenty of times and nothing seemed off then. So, something happened either last night or this morning. Is May okay? Peter shakes his head. May's fine. Then what is it? Is it Spider-Man? Ned, Peter hisses, his eyes wide. He quickly scans under the toilet stalls to make sure no one is there. No, it's not Spider-Man. Talk to me, Peter. Something's bothering you big time. I'm your best friend. Let me help. Peter huffs. I'm not sure how you can help with this. Well, unless you tell me, we won't know if I can or can't help. Mr. Stark, he's my dad. Like, biologically. Ned's eyes widen and his jaw drops. Peter continues, apparently he found out last week, did a paternity test and everything. Oh my God, Ned whispers, then suddenly his voice gets louder, Tony Stark is your dad. Shoots. Peter flaps his arms around in the air in a panic before slamming his hands over Ned's mouth. Keep your voice down. Dude, what is your life? Tell me about it, Peter mutters. He sinks down to the ground, wrapping his arms around his legs. Ned frowns. You're not happy that he's your dad? Peter sighs, letting his head rest against the wall. It's not that. Well, I don't think it's that. Peter groans. I don't know. I just have so many feelings and thoughts that I don't know what I'm feeling or thinking. Ned sits down next to Peter. It's okay to not know. I mean, finding out your dad is someone else from the person you thought it was, it's going to be a lot to take in. I feel like I don't know what to trust. Like, dad wasn't my real dad, so what else in my life isn't how I thought it was? I mean, am I still me? Because I feel like I don't know who I am now. And also, if I accept Mr. Stark as my dad, does that mean I'm betraying my dad? Now Peter's started, he can't stop rambling every thought that's passed through his mind since finding out. And was Mr. Stark telling the truth when he said he only just found out, or has he always known but he didn't think I was good enough? Plus, he's Iron Man. He could get hurt, or worse, he could die, and I'll lose him like I lost Mum and Dad and Uncle Ben. And would seeing Mr. Stark as my dad be an insult to Uncle Ben because I never called him dad even though he raised me? Peter. Ned interrupts because his friend needs to take a breath. How about you take some breaths and we'll work our way through your thoughts? Peter nods and takes several deep breaths, calming down his racing heart. Okay, first, I don't think you'd be betraying either your dad or uncle by accepting Mr. Stark as your dad. I think they'd be happy for you. Plus, people can have more than one dad and it's okay to see and love them both as your dad. Second, even if you had a regular guy as a dad, some guy who work in a shop or something, there'd still be a chance he'd get hurt. Sure, being Iron Man increased the risks, but bad things happen, you more than most know that. Third, why would you not be good enough to be Mr. Stark's son? Mr. Stark was in MIT at my age, I'm still in high school. He had so many achievements by the time he was my age, whereas I haven't. Peter pulls at some loose string on his jumper. What if he only wants something to do with me now that I'm Spider-Man? I think if he was only going to tell you that he was your dad because you're Spider-Man, he'd have done it a lot sooner. Plus, do you really believe that he's only interested in you because of Spider-Man? Because you've told me that you've had movie nights with him. Peter Parker. Not Spider-Man. Yeah, you're right. Mr. Stark wouldn't do that. Of course, I'm right. Ned lets a moment of quiet go by before he speaks again, and as for wondering who you are now, you're still Peter Parker. Finding out that Iron Man is your dad doesn't change the fact that you like Star Wars, or that for some weird reason you like your sandwiches squashed, or the fact that you're a really good person with a big heart that just wants to help everyone, or that you're my best friend. Ned waits for Peter to look at him before finishing. You're Peter Parker. Nothing is ever going to change that. Peter gives Ned a small smile. You feeling any better now? I'm still not really sure what I'm feeling, but yeah, I do feel a little less jumbled than before. Peter nods. Thanks, Ned. I'm your guy in the chair. It's what I do. Peter spent the rest of the week trying to sort out his feelings. After his talk with Ned, Peter decided to talk with May. And that conversation also helped him unscramble some of his thoughts and feelings. He also had a few chats with Karen because she's always been pretty good at talking him thought stuff. He didn't go to the compound on Wednesday because he was in no way ready to see Mr. Stark. It was just too soon and he hadn't worked through everything yet. But now, 5 days after finding out, he thinks he's ready to talk to Mr. Stark. It's Friday, and he's currently sat on a random building watching the sky get darker. He's trying to work up the courage to go to the compound, so he's in his Spider-Man suit because he's always more confident when he's his other self. Tony was currently trying to bury himself in work to try and forget the fact that his son didn't want anything to do with him. Of course, Pepper, Happy and Rhodey, who had left the day before because he had to go back to work, all said that Peter just needed time and that he'd be back soon. Tony wasn't holding his breath though, because why would Peter want him as a father? He's so glad that most of the alcohol is gone and that the only alcohol left is locked up and only Pepper has the override to unlock it, because he's sure that if he could get his hands on some, he'd be drunk off his butt by now. As it was, he hadn't slept since Tuesday because after May had called him on Wednesday to tell him Peter didn't want to come to the compound, Tony basically locked himself in the lab and hasn't been out since. Even the bots seemed sad when they noticed Peter didn't visit on Wednesday. Boss, Mrs. Boss is requesting for you to come to the living room. FRA's voice interrupts the music he had playing. Tell her I'm working. Mrs. Boss says for you to come now, because Peter is here, and at that Tony freezes, the tools in his hands dropping and clanging on the floor. Did I say what he thought she said? She couldn't have. What did you say? Tony is aware that his voice sounds shaky, but he ignores it and ignores you, who came over to pick up the tools from the floor. Peter is here, boss. Tony almost runs out of the lab and towards the living room. However, he stops just before he walks into the living. A wave of nerves washes over him. Peter could be here for one of two things. To either tell him that he wants nothing to do with him, or because he wants something to do with him. God, he's hoping it's the second one. After taking a second to collect himself, Tony walks into the living room and sees Pepper and Peter sitting on the couch. His eyes immediately fall on Peter and he notices that the boy is wearing his Spider-Man suit, with the mask off, and that he looks nervous. Peter's eyes are already on him when he walks into the room. Obviously the kid heard him coming with his heightened hearing. Pepper stands up from the couch and gives them both a warm smile. I'll leave you both to talk. She leans down and brushes a kiss to Peter's forehead before walking over to Tony to kiss his cheek as she leaves. Tony and Peter stare at each other in an awkward silence that just makes both of them more nervous the longer it lasts. While Tony would love to start telling Peter how much he means to him and everything, he knows that the boy needs to talk first and that he needs to listen. He has to let Peter lead the conversation. I'm sorry for showing up unannounced. Peter shuffles nervously in his seat. It's fine, Pete. You can stop by here whenever you want. Peter nods before biting his lip. I want to talk about, you know. Okay, Tony moves into the room and sits on the couch. Not quite next to Peter, even though he wants to, because he doesn't want to make Peter feel like he's crowding him. I'm sorry for not showing up on Wednesday. It's okay. You needed some time, which everyone had told Tony that Peter would need, but instead of listening, Tony may have overreacted a little bit and instead he thought his relationship with Peter was over. Clearly, he should have listened to them better. I don't want you to think I'm mad at you, I'm not. I was always Richard and Mary Parker's son, and now I'm not, and I was worried that meant I wasn't me, but I realized, with some help, that I'm still me. I'm still the same Peter Parker I was last week. Which is good because I happen to really like Peter Parker. He's a good kid, and Tony feels pretty proud of himself when Peter grins at him. I was also worried that I'd be hurting Dad, Richard, and Uncle Ben's memory by replacing them with you. But I also realized that I wouldn't be replacing them. They're still a part of my life, it's just that you would be to now, if that's what you want, Peter hastily adds, looking away from Tony. More than anything, and Tony can see Peter's cheeks flushing red, even if the boy isn't looking at him. I was also worried that I wasn't good enough to be your son, that you wouldn't be proud to have me as your kid, Peter mumbles, his eyes finding the carpet fascinating and Tony's heart clenches. If anyone isn't good enough, it's him, not Peter. He slides close so that he is now sat right next to his son. He taps Peter's chin to make the boy look at him. Peter, at 14 years old, you got superpowers. Instead of using your powers to make yourself popular, you use them to help people. The people that sometimes get overlooked because it's too little a crime for the police to deal with. You spend your free time helping others, while still maintaining amazing grades at school. You've been though more than anyone should, especially for someone your age, and yet you remain a kind-hearted person. How the hell could I not be proud of you? And as for not being good enough, Underoos, I could literally not dream up a better kid than you. Peter's eyes filled with tears, but he was determined not to cry. He'd already done that a few times this week, and he wanted to be done with the tears. Tony couldn't stop himself. He pulls Peter into a hug and holds him tight. Mostly because he's a little worried that this was just a hallucination from the lack of sleep he's had, but the warmth from Peter's body tells him it's not. It's real. Peter is here, and from everything that Peter has said, it seems like he may want to give the father and son thing a go. Chapter Hawkeye and Ant-Man. Peter stretches out his body, his arms reaching above his head and hitting the headboard, as he wakes up. His body feeling well rested for the first time since finding out that Mr. Tony was his biological father, as the past few days his mind just wouldn't shut off long enough for him to get a decent night's sleep. The good night's sleep was probably because he finally talked things out with Tony last night. It definitely felt good to get some things off his chest, to have the man take away some of his fears and worries. There were still some things they needed to talk about, but Peter had just felt so emotionally drained from everything that Tony had told him to head to bed and that he'd text May that he'd be spending the night. He was so tired that he didn't even bother to argue that 10 o'clock was too early for him to go to bed or try to argue that Spider-Man need to go out and stop some muggers because that was when the real crimes started happening. The idea of his head hitting a soft pillow and his body being wrapped in a comfy duvet was just too appealing. He pats around the bedside table for his phone, and once he grabs it, he's surprised to see that it's only 7. He's never woken up that early on a Saturday before. It's like an unwritten rule for all teenagers to sleep in as late as possible on the weekends. Then again, he did go to bed at 10, which is very early for him, so maybe it shouldn't be that surprising that he's up this early. Good morning, Peter. Boss would like me to inform you that breakfast is ready. FRI's voice brings Peter out of his thoughts. Morning, FRI. Peter sits up, rubbing a hand over his face to wipe away the sleep. I'll be right there. Peter shuffles out of his bed. He doesn't bother getting dressed since it's Saturday morning and it's only breakfast, so he's only in a pair of flannel pajama bottoms and a t-shirt. He fumbles around as he pulls some fuzzy socks on his feet to keep them warm against the cool floor. He leaves his room and heads towards the kitchen where he hears Miss Potts and Mr. Tony. He's really going to have to try and get out of the habit of calling the man Mr. Stark now. Though he's not sure if he's ready to call him Dad yet. Sure, he's accidentally called him Dad to May once, maybe twice, and yes, he does see Tony as a father figure, but Peter's pretty sure that it's a little too soon, after everything this past week, to be pulling out the D word. Anyway, would Mr. S. Tony even want to be called Dad? The man seems like he's happy with being his father, but would calling him Dad make him feel uncomfortable? It's probably best to wait a while before using that word. Let them both get used to their new relationship. Their new relationship. Father and son. Even nearly a week later and it's still unbelievable and mind-boggling. He has a father who is alive. A father who he used to dress up as for Halloween. He hopes May doesn't still have those photos. Are things going to be awkward now? Last night was a little awkward, but that was mainly because of him running away the last time he saw the man, but it quickly became less awkward and began to feel more like normal. Peter really hopes that this doesn't change anything between them, that it doesn't become an uncomfortable silence between them as they awkwardly work in the lab, being overly aware of what the other is doing. Just the thought of their time in the lab becoming like that sends a tight panic through Peter's body. He loves spending time with Tony in the lab and he doesn't want to ruin that or ruin any time that they spend together. He's just got to try and act like normal and hopefully everything will be okay. Peter braces himself as he enters the kitchen. Miss Potts is sat on one of the stools around the kitchen island drinking a cup of coffee, dressed immaculately of course, and Tony is stood on the opposite side of the island, leaning over the countertop with his forearms, wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt and some cargo briefs. Both of them turn their heads to look at him as he walks into the room, making him freeze in his step, and he's sure he looks like a deer caught in headlights. Good morning, Peter. Pepper smiles sweetly, taking a sip from her coffee. The boy's hair is currently just a mop of untamed curls, and she thinks it's absolutely adorable. Morning, Miss Potts. Peter is happy that his voice comes out normal. I don't know how many times I have to tell you, it's just Pepper. She shakes her head, but her smile remains so he knows that she isn't annoyed with him. Peter grins, old habits die hard. He walks further into the room and sits on the stool next to Pepper. Well, considering the new revelation, maybe we could try and get the name Pepper to come out of your mouth instead. I think it might be a little weird to keep calling me Miss Potts. There was no tiptoeing around subjects when Pepper was involved. She likes to get straight to the point. Though a gentle smile is still on her face as a way to keep Peter comfortable with the conversation. Peter bites his lip and nods, his grin turning into a shy kind of smile. You have a point. Although it's going to feel weird not calling you Miss Potts because, well, you're Miss Potts. And what am I? Chopped liver? Tony interrupts. Yes, both Peter and Pepper answer, with smirks on their faces. Unbelievable. Tony throws his hands up in the air. This is not allowed. You two are not allowed to gang up on me. Don't be so dramatic. Pepper turns to Tony. I'm Tony Stark. Everything I do is dramatic. Don't I know it? Pepper sighs as she takes a look at her watch to check the time. She quickly finishes of the rest of her coffee and gracefully slides off her stool. I'll leave you boys to mostly likely play in the lab because I have to head to work. She walks around to kiss Tony goodbye before giving Peter a kiss on the side of his head as she passes by him to leave. Be careful. When aren't I? Wait, don't answer that. Tony shouts after Pepper's retreating figure as Peter tries and fails to cover up his sniggering. Hey. Tony turns to Peter, like you're any better, Mr. I got bit by a radioactive spider during my school field trip and then decided to become a superhero. Careful isn't in your vocabulary. Peter pulls an offended face. I feel like that's getting bit by the radioactive spider part was more Oscorp's lack of safety than mine. Tony pauses for a moment, as though he's thinking about it, and then nods. I suppose you're right. He turns around and pulls out a plate from the oven that had been keeping Peter's extra-large breakfast warm. Here, eat up Underoos. Tony had been up about an hour earlier than Peter, having woken up with Pepper, and had made omelets for breakfast as that was one of the few meals he was trusted to make. He could make omelets, pancakes, and a few Italian dishes, and that was about it for foods that required cooking, unless they wanted to burn the kitchen down. For the first time since Tuesday night, or more likely early Wednesday morning, he had actually gone to bed and gotten some much-needed sleep, and also a shower. Pepper had refused to share a bed with him till he washed, which was fair since he hadn't come out of his lab in about 3 days because he had been upset about Peter not coming. Though before he showered and slept, he texted May to let her know where her nephew was, so she didn't worry. Then he went to check on Peter, to make sure the teen was getting the sleep he also needed. Which he was. Peter was fast asleep. Tony couldn't help himself. He stood in the doorway and just watched his son sleep for a few minutes. His son. It felt so, he didn't know how to describe it. He just still can't get over the fact that he has a child. A child who was in his home and sleeping peacefully. He just felt full of so many different emotions. Happy, scared, thankful, hopeful, vulnerable, optimistic, content, anxious, insecure, amazed, worried, eager, love. So many emotions. It felt like his heart was going to explode. Peter had been laying on his back, mouth open, with some drool already coming from his mouth. His son must have been completely out of it because he didn't wake up when he walked into the room and reached out a hand to brush some of Peter's curls from his forehead. He left soon after that because he didn't want to risk waking the boy up. He showered away his 3-day-old stink. Then he quickly snuggled in next to Pepper in bed. It shouldn't have been surprising how easy sleep came to him last night, with his mind feeling a lot more at ease and his body relaxed. He slept for almost 8 straight hours, which is basically a record for him. So, he was actually feeling quite refreshed today. Peter shoves a large forkful of one of his omelets into his mouth. Thank Mr. Tark, he says with his mouth still full of food. Tony raises an eyebrow. First, take small bites or you're going to choke. Second, don't talk with your mouth full. And third, I think maybe we can stop with the Mr. Stark stuff. You know, considering. Peter swallows his mouthful of food and nervously looks up at Tony. Why, of course, yeah. God, he hasn't stuttered in front of Tony for months. Now he's back to his dilemma from earlier. Does he or doesn't he call him Dad? The answer is still the same, he can't right now because he doesn't want to make things weird with Tony. Thanks for the breakfast, Tony. Peter gives a nervous smile, which Tony copies, before eating a small forkful of omelette. Tony can't deny that Peter calling him Tony instead Dad's hurt, because it did. May had said that Peter had once called him Dad to her, so he may have gotten his hopes up in the thought that Peter would call him that. That Peter would see him as his dad. Perhaps the teen just needed a little more time to feel comfortable in calling him Dad. That was probably it. This time he isn't going to let his self-hatred talk him into thinking Peter doesn't want him, because that isn't true. The fact that Peter is here now, eating breakfast in his home, shows that Peter does want him in his life. He just needs a bit more time to adjust, and Tony is happy to give Peter all the time in the world. He'll earn the title Dad, no matter how long it takes him. Tony pours himself a cup of coffee, because no matter how much sleep he's had, he basically needs coffee to live. He's almost positive that if he didn't have 5 liters of coffee a day, he'd go into some sort of caffeine withdrawal and would probably die from the lack of coffee in his system. Peter scrapes up the last bits of his breakfast, clearing his plate like he does for all meals thanks to his metabolism, and quickly finishes eating. He then looks up at Tony, who is already watching him. "I was wondering about living arrangements?" Peter says nervously, because as nice as it would be to spend more time with you, Tony. She's dash. "It's okay, Peter, I'm not going to take you away from May. She's your family," Tony tells him, and Peter relaxes in his seat. "But I talked to May and we thought, if you're okay with it, that maybe you'd like to have a couple more days here with me. You'll still live with May, of course, you just spend a few more nights here sometimes." Peter nods his head, a shy smile on his lips. "Yeah, that'd be great." Tony feels himself relax now, with Peter confirming that he did want to spend more time with him. "We were thinking that on the weekends that you already spend here, instead of Happy picking you up on Saturday, you could come here after school on the Friday." Peter nods, happy with the idea. As Tony continues, "We figured that once we all got a little more settled, we could find a few more days here and there that you could spend here. Like maybe Lab Wednesday? Instead of going home, I could stay here," Peter suggests. "I just have to get up a little earlier on Thursday to get to school." Tony can't stop the grin that makes its way onto his face. "That sounds like a great idea, though we'll have to run it by May 1st, which reminds me. After I texted your aunt last night, she said you could stay the weekend if you want. I figured we could get some training in that we couldn't do last weekend and maybe spend a bit of time in the lab." Peter's face fills with happiness, before he remembers one other thing he needs to ask about. "You're Tony Stark." Tony stares at Peter with confusion. "Yeah, I'm Tony Stark." Tony suddenly frowns. "Did you hit your head last night on patrol before you came here? I didn't get an alert from the scrapped Ninja protocol." Peter bats away Tony's hands as the man tries to grab his head to look for any bumps. "No, I'm fine. I just meant, you're Tony Stark, you're famous. The press, they don't leave you alone, Anne, and when they find out that I'm, they're going to dash. They're not going to do anything. Or at least not for a while." Tony interrupts Peter's rambling. "You're right about the press not leaving me alone. They don't leave anyone alone in case they miss a story, and I don't want that for you. Unfortunately, it will be impossible for us to hide you from the press forever, but we're going to keep it quiet for as long as we can so that you can have a normal life." Tony pauses for a second. "Or as normal of a life that a teenaged boy who's also a web-slinging vigilante can have." He gives Peter a reassuring look. Peter nods, feeling relieved once more. If everyone was to find out he was Tony Stark's son, the others at school would never leave him alone, although the one upside to them knowing would be that Flash couldn't tease him about lying about knowing Tony Stark. The look on Flash's face would almost be worth telling everyone. Almost. There would also be the press who wouldn't leave him alone if they found out, and how could he be Spider-Man if he had people following him? He's always been a private person. So, suddenly having people want to know everything about him is going to be horrible. He's not stupid. He does know that eventually they would have to tell everyone that Tony Stark has a son. He knows that, and it scares him, but there is no escaping it because he's a famous person's kid. Maybe in a few years it may not seem so daunting, but there is no way he could handle it right now or anytime soon. Especially when he's still coming to terms with all of it himself. So, if they can hold it off for as long as possible, he'll be grateful and take as much time as he can get. "I told Ned about this. Is that all right?" Peter asks. "He's your guy in the chair, right? Your best friend." Tony's proud that he remembered that. "Of course it's all right. You can tell anyone you want as long as you trust them. That includes your little girlfriend, Tay." Peter groans, throwing his head back. "Tony, stop." Peter and Tony spent the weekend as they normally would. They spent a few hours training and then relaxed in front of the telly to watch a few movies. On the Saturday, because they had both been up early, they managed to squeeze in some time in the lab. Although not much got done because the bots wouldn't leave Peter alone. For the first hour they were in the lab, Peter was pretty much stuck in the middle of the bots as the three of them had him surrounded. Tony had found it hilarious and chose to sit and watch his bots circling his son, while Peter attempted and failed to escape their circle. Dummy kept trying to shove one of his oil smoothies into Peter's hand, you kept tugging on Peter's hoodie, and Butterfingers kept trying to pat Peter on the head. Tony made sure to get lots of photos. He also informed Peter, when the boy started getting frustrated and asked why the bots were acting like that they saw him as their little brother. which made Peter turn slightly red, and he lost all frustrations with the bots and he let them continue their smothering of him. Eventually, Tony had to threaten the bots with being turned into scraps if they didn't give Peter some space. They did so, but not without several whiny beeps. Once they got to working, both in the lab and during training, Peter was pleasantly surprised, apart from the first couple of minutes, just how not awkward it was. Everything went just how it normally would, and Peter felt so relieved that nothing had really changed. Watching movies in the evening felt awkward for a little longer because Peter was more aware of how close he and Tony sat next to each other, but he was soon engrossed in the movie, so all insecurities disappeared. The weekend just went really well, and it made Peter feel a lot more secure in this whole situation and made most of his worries disappear. It was still odd to think about the fact that he has a parent that was alive. It'll probably take ages for him to get his head around it, but he can see this working out. Tony was very pleased with how the weekend went. He tried to keep it relaxed and as normal as possible for Peter, to make him more comfortable, and he's pretty sure it worked. Peter seemed like he was at ease and like he enjoyed the weekend. Which is what Tony wants, because if Peter has a good first weekend as father and son, then he'll keep coming back. When Happy came to pick Peter up Sunday evening, some of the nervousness returned because Peter wasn't sure whether he was supposed to hug Tony goodbye or not. In the end, they ended up awkwardly standing in front of one another, neither one making a move, with Happy standing at the elevator rolling his eyes at the pair of them. Eventually Peter just awkwardly waves at Tony and throws a "see you on Wednesday" Tony over his shoulder as he walks to the elevator. Tony is left standing with a grin on his face. Peter and Ned slide into their usual seats for lunch. "You were radio silent all weekend, Peter. What were you up to? Was it Spider-Man?" Ned's voice is gleeful and definitely not as quiet as it should have been. "Sure, Ned." Peter WHPs his head around, checking to see if anyone overheard. No one did, of course, because no one pays attention to the two losers sat in the corner. The closest person to them was MJ, who is sat a few chairs away and is engrossed in reading. She looks so pretty when she's lost in one of her many books, her face slightly pinched in concentration. It wasn't that Peter lowers his voice, pulling his thoughts away from MJ and back to Ned. "I was with Mr. Stark. Did you talk things out with him about the 'I am your father' thing?" Ned leans in closer, eager to hear what his best friend has to say. Peter nods. "Yeah. We talked things over, and you and May were right. I was worrying about things unnecessarily." Peter's mouth starts turning up into a small smile. He wants to give this a go. "We spent the weekend together. I was a little worried that spending time together would be awkward now, but it wasn't, not much. Only a little to start with, but then we were working together like normal. Told you everything would be fine." It's still surreal though. Peter fiddles with his fingers. "I have a dad. A dad who's Iron Man." Ned grins, his voice rising slightly. "Shoo," Peter hisses. "Sorry, it's just, have I mentioned recently how I'm so glad you're my best friend?" Most days, Peter shakes his head, but the grin stays on his face. "So, what did you do at the compound?" Ned asks, ready to absorb everything Peter tells him. Peter rambles on about everything he and Tony did over the weekend, especially in the lab. It takes Ned all of his willpower to keep quiet when Peter tells him about the bots and their new obsession with him. The conversation eventually turns to what new movies will be out soon and which Lego set are they going to build next. At some point, during that, Peter finds himself looking over at MJ. He's contributing less and less into the conversation with Ned as he focuses more on MJ. She has a curl of hair that's fallen from her ponytail and is right in front of her face. She doesn't seem bothered by it though. She just carries on reading with her eyes scrunched up in her normal MJ way. Peter watches as MJ places a bookmarker into her book as she puts her book down and picks up her phone. He frowns in confusion as MJ holds her phone out and takes a selfie of herself. Peter is pretty positive that MJ isn't one of those people who takes selfies all the time. Taking a selfie seems like a very un-MJ-like thing to do. He finally looks away from MJ. He isn't sure how long he was staring at her when his phone beeps. Sliding his phone open, Peter opens the text he just got and becomes even more confused at what he sees. Why'd you send me a selfie?" He looks back over at him. "Pictures last longer," MJ says. not even sparing Peter a glance as she picks her book back up. Peter can feel his face turning red as his eyes widen and his jaw drops. It takes him almost a minute to respond. I wasn't staring, I was just, hello. MJ raises an eyebrow but doesn't look up from her book. Peter shuts his mouth and turns to look back at Ned. He's sure his facial expression shows the horror he's feeling. You are hopeless, dude. Ned shakes his head. Peter groans in response. You know you could just ask her out, right? Sure. Peter flaps his arms around in panic. She already caught me looking at her. I can't just ask her out. Yes, you can. MJ's just started being our friend. I don't want to ruin that. Peter sighs. Can we drop this, please? His friend is 100% ridiculous, but he isn't going to push him since he does have quite a bit going on at the moment. For now, Ned will wait and see how this plays out. He nods and changes the subject. So, which Lego set should we go for? Von Reg's TIE Fighter? Or First Order at St. The rest of the week goes by like normal, or it mostly goes by like normal. Peter finds that it takes him a few days before he has the nerve to even glance at MJ now. He has his usual Wednesday at the compound, though this time he stays the night and Happy takes him to school Thursday morning, and he spends the weekend with May, which he enjoys immensely because it had felt like forever since he and May had spent some proper time together. Spider-Man stopped several would-be bike thieves and helps a couple of old women across the road. He also rescued a ferret from a tree because apparently ferrets are the new cats, or at least that's what the little girl had said after he rescued her pet. The next 3 weeks continue on like that, and with the alternating weekends at Tony and May's, which makes Peter happy. He'll admit that there is still a slight oddness whenever he's with Tony, because he still can't get over the fact that, 1, he has a dad, and 2, that dad is Tony Stark. However, when they are together it doesn't feel like much has changed. He feels like something should have changed, but no. It feels mostly like it did before they found out they were father and son, which makes Peter realize that maybe they had been acting a little like father and son for a while. Which is probably why he had taken to accidentally calling Tony's dads in front of May, and why he's been almost calling him dad for the past few weeks too. That's made things a little stressful, trying to make sure he doesn't call Tony dad because he doesn't want to freak the man out. Each week it seems to get harder, so this weekend he's going to have to be alert and make sure he doesn't slip up. He doesn't want to ruin this. Not now, not while everything's going so well. We're here, kid's Happy says, pulling Peter from his thoughts. He hadn't even realized that Happy had pulled up to the compound. You're quiet today, kid, you okay? Peter meets Happy's eyes in the mirror and nods. I'm good. Just got lost in my thoughts. Happy looks at Peter for a moment, deciding whether or not to believe the boy, before nodding. Okay, enjoy your weekend. You too. Peter smiles at Happy before he stumbles his way out of the car and up the steps to the compound, his school bag slung over his shoulder. Good afternoon, Peter. Ty's chipper voice greets Peter as he enters the compound and heads towards the elevator. Hey Fridwich, Peter replies in an equally cheery voice. Where's Tony? Boss is in one of the conference rooms. Shall I take you there? I don't want to disturb his meeting, Peter says as he steps into the elevator. Boss is not currently in a meeting. I'll take you to him. And before Peter could tell her it was okay to drop him off in Tony and Pepper's floor, Fridwich takes him up to the conference floor. I can just go to Tony's floor and start my homework, Peter says, not stepping off the elevator. Boss is in conference room 2, is all Fridwich says, continuing to hold the doors open for him. Peter sighs. Clearly, she isn't going to take him anywhere else. Thanks, Fridwich. He steps out of the elevator and walks over to the conference room. He has no idea why Tony would be in a conference room if he wasn't in a meeting. Tony didn't like being in the conference room when there was a meeting. Tony is almost 100% certain that talking to an actual brick wall would have better results than talking to Lang and Barton. Neither man, Barton in particular, are getting it through their thick heads that he's trying to help them. Last week, the Accords Committee had finally agreed to letting Lang and Barton come home if they agreed to house arrest. Now, a week later, they are here to get their ankle monitors put on, and making Tony regret doing this for them. Since Tony had been the one to think of the idea and push the idea, he had to be the one responsible for Lang and Barton during their house arrest. That had been one of the conditions of agreeing to let the two men come back home. Another condition was that he had to, personally, make the ankle monitors so that neither man could find a way out of them, and he has to have weekly check-ins with the men too. Of course, this wasn't going over too well with them. Well, it was mostly Barton that was being difficult. Barton doesn't trust him, which is fine because he doesn't trust Barton either. Lang was mostly staying quiet and Tony was pretty sure the man just wanted to get the monitor on quickly so he could go see his kid. However, because Barton is kicking up a fuss, it is taking longer than it should have. Apparently, even though he doesn't trust that the house arrest deal is a legitimate offer, he still came out of hiding for it. This is the kind of idiocy that he's having to deal with. Do you really think I believe that it's just that simple? Clint glares at Tony, arms crossed over his chest. We can just wear an ankle monitor and that's it? We can go home with no problems? Brick wall. If you don't trust me or the committee, then why did you come here? Tony just wants this to hurry up and be over. Look, I get it. You don't trust me and that's fine, I don't care. I'm just trying to get you both home to your kids. And how? Are we supposed to believe that you aren't actually doing this to screw us over? If I was going to screw anyone over, which I'm not by the way, it would be Rogers. Not you. You are low down on my list of people who I'm set at, and Lang, I don't even know you. I have no feelings towards you, no offense. Lang shrugs, his face showing that he was offended. I just want to see Cassie. I don't care how that happens. Even if you have to make a deal with the devil? Clint mutters and Tony rolls his eyes. Look, you either wear the ankle monitors and go home, or you don't and you become fugitives again. Tony huffs. I'm just trying to give you the chance to be with your kids. And why would you care about that? And as if on cue like it was rehearsed, the door glides open and Peter steps in. Tony hadn't forgotten that the boy would be coming, he was looking forward to spending time with his son, he just didn't realize that he'd been arguing with Barton for as long as he had. Both Lang and Barton should have been on their way home by now. Hey Tony, sorry if I'm interrupting anything. I brought me up here, but I can go to your floor if you want, Peter says before he actually takes a look at who's in the room. Tony can see the exact moment when Peter realizes who the two men are because his eyes widen almost comically. He can also see Barton's face twist in confusion. Hawkeye and Ant-Man, Peter says under his breath. Peter clears his throat a little and speaks a little louder, you're Hawkeye and Ant-Man. Scott's face changes from being slightly confused to being excited. You know who I am? Clint squints at Peter, looking the boy up and down. Who are you? Peter nervously looks over at Tony. Tony sighs and motions for Peter to come and stand next to him. He throws his arm around Peter's shoulders, a move to comfort both of them, and also give himself a boost of confidence. This is Peter. Peter gives a shy wave and Clint raises an eyebrow. And Peter is? Peter is the main reason why I care about you getting to see your kids. Tony takes in a breath to relax himself. While he doesn't trust Barton, he does trust that the man wouldn't tell anyone about Peter being his son. Barton knows what it's like to keep your kids a secret to keep them safe. I wouldn't want to be kept away from my kid either. If Tony wasn't so tense, he'd laugh at Lang and Barton's faces. Clint blinks, completely at a loss for words. I didn't know you had a kid, Scott says. Neither did I until last month, Tony sighs, his hand tightening around Peter's shoulder. This information is being kept quiet because I don't want the press finding out about Peter until he's older. So, if you could keep your mouths shut about it, I'd appreciate it. If not for me, then for Peter. Both Scott and Clint nod quietly, still trying to comprehend what they just found out. Well, I guess with your past, having a few kids running around shouldn't be surprising. Scott's eyes widen at what he just says. That came out wrong. I'm going to shut up. That's probably best. Tony turns and looks at Clint. I've only known about Peter being my son for a month, but he's been in my life for longer and I grew attached to him. It was just some strange but amazing luck that my dorky in turn turned out to be my kid. Tony looks down at Peter and smiles at him. Peter grins back and he looks back towards Clint. If I was in your position, it would kill me not being able to see or even talk to my kid. Trust me or don't. That's up to you, but I really am trying to help you see your kids. Clint stares at Tony and Peter and takes in a sight he never thought he'd see. Okay, I trust you.